Baldur's Gate 3 is pretty good. And finally, after 123 hours of playtime, I beat the game. And now that I have, I want to reflect on the entire campaign that my character and I went through. I want to highlight the amazing highs this game provides and shed some light on the surprising lows. Because no matter how much I enjoyed this game, and it really is one of my favorite games I've played in a very long time, it isn't perfect and had quite a few moments that honestly kind of let me down. So I'm going to be running through the whole storyline, at least from my character's perspective. So that being said, there will be spoilers, and I'll add chapters in the videos though, and I'll mark what's happening so you can at least watch up to where you yourself are at in the game if you haven't beat it yet. The game opens with the player and a Githyanki woman being held hostage aboard a Mind Flayer ship. The Flayer reaches into a vat of viscous liquid and pulls out what will be referred to from here on out as a tadpole. He inserts one into the woman's eye and then proceeds towards the character and infects them with this parasite. This scene is so visceral and disgusting, and I love it.
You with my little mouth,
the gnarling teeth in the camera and the tadpole squirming into the woman's eye just sets the tone for the ticking time bomb that just wiggled into my brainstem. Now, it's time to decide what my newly affected parasite host looks like. The character creation screen can suck me in for hours, flicking through races and classes, building out an entire character, then at the last minute changing my mind and deciding to go through the whole process again. There's so much information on the race side and the class side that Larian Studios did a great job making the appearance selections super simple and clean. After all is said and done, I have my character, Faendel, the half wood elf rogue whose namesake is a homage to the wood elf in Riverwood in Skyrim.
Hi, how are you?
And I'll just say now, I truly regret making a rogue, but we'll talk about why later. Then I had to make my guardian, which every character I've ever created, I just select the opposite sex of whatever race I made. Really just couldn't care less about this. Once I finished creating my character, another cutscene ensues. It shows the Mind Flayer ship, the Nautiloid, attacking a city and capturing prisoners while being assaulted by Githyanki dragon riders. The Nautiloid warps in an attempt to escape and ends up in one of the plains of hell and is assaulted by fiends.
Hey, Bobby.
Okay, the groundwork has been laid. We're infected. Mind Flayers are bad dudes. Let's go. The ship crashed, freeing me from the pod. I shoved my thumb up the anus of a brain. I shoved myself through the anus of a ship. I finally reunited with my Githyanki cellmate, and turns out she's quite rude.
Abomination. This is your end.
Lae'zel and I found a goth babe trapped in a pod. Lae'zel tells me to leave her behind,
You have no time for struggle.
but I cannot. Her vanilla appearance and personality call to me. My newfound team blows through the sphincter and are thrown into a fight with Commander Zulk and his minions.
That's a clean burning hell, I tell you what.
We quickly dispatch the imps and Hellbore and start wailing on Zulk. After a few turns of combat, some of his Cambion cronies show up though, so we had to Scooby-Doo run to the transponder and get off the ship. Once landed on the beach, I found Shadowheart passed out in the sand holding an artifact. Being the gentleman that I am, I woke her up Shrek style.
Wake up! What?
After waking up, Shadowheart is very shifty about the artifact she's holding, but we decide we'd be better off teaming up.
We need each other, and we both know what's at stake.
After a quick jog down the beach, we found an old temple door that I, being a rogue, promptly broke into. After disarming a million freaking traps, Shadowheart and I found ourselves in a fight with some undead. With just the two of us, this fight actually was pretty freaking tough and took a few tries to actually win. I then met an undead man named Withers, who would later join us in camp. After a tough fight, it was time to rest. At camp, I tried to chat up Shadowheart, who at the moment is playing hard to get.
No harm in a little mystery, don't you think?
After fighting our way through the rest of the temple, we found Lae'zel again, who threatened to kill me.
Or die.
So I killed her. It's incredible that no one is truly invulnerable, except apparently Withers, but one of my close friends played his entire campaign with Lae'zel, and I literally know absolutely nothing about her. it adds a huge amount of replayability to the game that you can vary your experience so much. Further down the road, we ran into a goblin war party attacking an encampment, and we met the main character of the game. Wyll is your friend who is like a self-righteous douchebag, and people say, hey, why are you friends with this guy? And you kind of just shrug and say, well, he's actually not that bad once he gets to know him.
And suffering sting.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
After a quick fight with the Goblin War Party, a tiefling named Zevlor opened the gates and led us into the grove. Inside, I helped the sweet bard tiefling write a song, and inside the grove we got an insight on the conflict between the druids and tiefling refugees that are trying to make their way to Baldur's Gate. Now I've been tasked with the job of killing 3 leaders of the nearby goblin encampment, who also happen to be holding hostage Halsin, a powerful druid who can possibly remove my parasite. At camp, Shadowheart's mysterious artifact somehow magically transferred into my possession. After a long rest, we started sneaking our way through the goblin encampment, and we heard some strange banging noise coming from a nearby shed.
What the hell are you doing?
Ruined. Smash. Oh, smash you!
As funny and surprising as this scene was when I found it, this is the type of stuff that makes me love this game. A lighthearted visual gag of a bugbear giving it to a female ogre, but when you kill the bugbear first, the ogre woman actually shouts in horror about her lover being killed. At the moment, my party was only Shadowheart and myself. As a rogue, I was finding it way easier to move as just a unit of 2, and because we made our way through the temple by picking the lock, I actually never met Gale or Astarion during this playthrough, so I know almost nothing about them. But later on in the game, I do encounter one of them in an insane way that we'll talk about later. But just rolling with Shadowheart definitely made the game hard, made the fights very difficult, but it forced me to always find the creative solution to the challenges I was presented with, and I found it to be really, really fun early on. A few minutes down the road, I ran into a man named Raphael, who is in fact the devil. Well, a devil. He gives me a tantalizing offer to help us free this parasite from our brain, which I decline because I don't want to make a deal with the devil, but this isn't the last we'll see of Raphael. He is truthfully one of my favorite characters in the game. The charismatic representation of the devil is so well done and true to how the devil would actually operate. Shadowheart and I took the high ground into the goblin's lair, sneaking around the blacked out drunken goblins up top. We tried breaking through a wall, but in doing so actually woke up one of the drunken goblins.
Are we under attack?
A symbol on his face lit up, showing his mark of the Absolute. This being now the second time we've heard this strange name. I first heard about the Absolute from 2 cultist siblings named Brina and Andric, who I killed. I convinced the gob to go back to sleep, and Shadowheart and I pressed onwards. Once we hopped down into the goblin celebration below, we passed a bard named Volo performing for the goblins. Once inside the fortress, Shadowheart and I found our first target, Priestess Gut. She called me a true soul, whatever that means, and while talking to her, I prodded into her mind and saw a vision.
The temple, leaving you with a vision of the goblin priestess, receiving instruction from a handsome young man, one of the chosen. The vision dissolves away. You stand before the goblin priestess in the temple once again.
I eventually asked if she could help me remove the tadpole in my head, and she ushered me away into a back room. Once in the room alone with Gut, I very cleverly stood 5 feet away from her and shot her with an arrow of acid. At this point, I was still so unaware of my character's capabilities and how to best set up a fight. And I think it's one of the beautiful aspects of this game is how much I learned about the combat system and environment, that fighting only got more interesting as the game progressed. Eventually I killed Gut, but more and more reinforcements showed up and we eventually died. So I thought. Shadowheart and I have actually been taken prisoner by the goblins and locked in a cell down below. Man, I love stuff like this. where failing in a fight just isn't an insta-reload last save, but has implications and actually shifts the trajectory of the story in a different way. Now, this isn't always the case in this game. Later on, there are heaps of times where I died and I just have to reload a save, but in this moment, it's really great. After getting out of prison, it was time to take down Ragslan, an extremely intimidating fire-red hobgoblin. Shadowheart and I walked in on Drawer Ragslan in the middle of casting Speak to the Dead on a Mind Flayer corpse. He is struggling to cast a spell and turned to me and recognizes me as a true soul. Our minds intertwined, revealing to me he's in search of a great weapon. When talking of the weapon, Shadowheart all of a sudden connects to my mind as well, revealing that the weapon he seeks is in fact the artifact that we hold, and we can't under any circumstance let them have it. Oh, and also, Ragslan finally talks with the undead mind flayer, but since the flayer was also on the ship, he definitely would recognize me, so I also need to circumnavigate around that. So I have to take control over Ragslan's mind using the power of the parasite. This felt like a lot to me, but kind of in a good way. So much information is dumped on the player at once here, it would be extremely easy to get flustered and distracted and mess up the speech checks that need to be passed with Ragslan, that if are failed, they lead into a very difficult fight. I weaved my way through the minefield of questions, leaving Ragslan irritated but not suspicious.
Collapses, silent once more.
No! I'm not done! Riddles, all of it, and nothing to show for the trouble but rotting squid meat. No answers, no killer, and no damned weapon. That damned Drow was right. Can't let her get all the glory. Seems I ain't done with you. Report to the Drow. Minthara's the name. She's mounting an attack on that blasted grove. Tell her you'll join her.
Yeah, I'm not doing any of that. Instead, let me introduce you to... There is a ton of explosive indestructible items in this game, which are super fun to goof around with and use, but I think the only problem with them is that they can be placed around whoever and they won't even question it. If the player drops an Acme stick of dynamite next to someone like Wile E. Coyote, they should probably be asked about it and have to pass like a speech check or a deception check to not alarm them.
Why are you putting a barrel of gunpowder next to me?
After killing Ragslan, his corpse had a mind flayer parasite on it that I could utilize if I want to.
This one is a true soul parasite. It can enhance you. You can absorb its potential. Open your mind to it. You already know how.
I don't. Faendale's whole deal is kind of being a good guy that's just trying to get rid of this parasite. Afterwards, I went and killed Minthara, which wasn't exciting at all. I just stood on top of a rafter and shot her with my bow over and over again. After killing Minthara, it was rescue time. We rescued a bear, who turned out to be Halsin, the main reason we're even here. Then rescued Volo the Bard, then we rescued this guy. I don't know who this guy is. Then Shadowheart and I descended into the Underdark. Upon entering the Underdark, we watched a Minotaur get incinerated by a magic sentry turret, and I thought to myself, yeah, we're gonna need some help. So, I fast traveled back to the Druids Grove, and I informed Zevlor that the goblins have been cleared out, and it's safe for the tieflings to travel to Baldur's Gate. We added the main character, Wyll, to the party, and finally, after all of that, it was time for a long rest, and the tieflings came to celebrate. At camp, Volo the Bard we rescued is there, and he claims he can actually help me remove my parasite. And what follows is one of the funniest scenes that makes my skin crawl rewatching it. Volo claims he can just manually extract the parasite using his big needle.
I've a needle in my tunic after all.
Pain shoots through your body as the needle snags on your optic nerve.
I shall need a more robust implement.
He produces an ice pick. Stab.
Do you feel that? Ha! I think we have the blighter on the run. I agree.
Volo tears the pick from your brain with a violent jerk. Your eye plops down into the mud. He pauses, looks down at your eye, and recoils slightly as it sinks into the mud.
At this moment, I literally thought Volo just murdered me, and now I gotta reload. Turns out I'm not dead. Volo gives me a fake eye to make up for it, and then proceeds to sprint off into the darkness. But Faendale can now see invisible enemies with his newfound fake eyeball, so I guess that's a plus. It's so incredible of the developers to add so many little sideshow conversations like this into the game. Interactions that aren't necessarily additive to the main storyline, but reward players who explore and delve into conversations. After the party begins to wind down, Shadowheart invites me to join her for a private moment and to share a bottle of wine down by the river. She asks me questions about myself, and once persuaded reveals that she barely remembers anything about her childhood, and that the worship of Shar has sacrificed a lot of her own memories. After a while, we laid down and shared a kiss. In most games, I'm really not all that into romance because it's just normally done so poorly, but in this, at least with Shadowheart, it feels a bit more rewarding. Each interaction, doing the right thing to peel back a layer and work towards something bigger.
Let's head back, if we must.
After a long night, it was finally time to journey into the Underdark, now accompanied by Wyll as well. Back at camp, Halsin told us we need to find passage to Moonrise Tower and find the source of the tadpoles. The Underdark is a tough and treacherous place, dangers and enemies lurking around every corner. We ran into a Yuergir dwarf down by an abandoned village who decided to try and kill and eat me for not helping them find a runaway slave. After an extremely tough fight and managing to kill them, we commandeered one of their ships and sailed into the dark waters below. While sailing in the void, another dwarven ship pulled up beside us and questioned how we got Gek's ship. I lied and told them that a Myconid had killed him, and the Corsair guided us to shore so we could relay the information of Gek's death. As our boat exited the darkness, we pulled into a massive underground ruin with giant statues erupting from the darkness, and massive mechanical gates began to spin and lift open for our boat as we entered into the harbor.
Well, I'll be plowed sideways. We've got a welcoming party.
The dwarf informs us that there had been a rockfall trapping the true soul that's here, and as we're getting questioned about the ship and Gek's death, my brain resonates with the female dwarf, and she calls me a cult freak and holds me up for gold because the other cult member here owes them a load of coin, apparently.
But I'm warning you, that twat soul ain't settled up soon. There'll be hell to pay for the lot of you cult buggers.
After a long day in the Underdark, it was finally time for a long rest, and Nier, the true soul that's here, tried to contact us saying that he senses our presence nearby. After resting, we wandered over to the main chamber where the cave-in occurred. There are deep gnome slaves chipping away with pickaxes at the rubble, and the gnomes pleaded with us for help in freeing them and informed us where we could find some hidden explosives. After finding the explosives, I instead decided to blow up this other pile of rubble I found tucked away in the ruins. I figured I'd do some exploring through here, then I'd worry about old Nier for later. I delved deep into the ruins and I eventually found the Adamantine Forge. This incredible, powerful forge surrounded by bubbling lava. I didn't have the components to work the forge, so I left it be and continued deeper into the ruins. I navigated through a field of lava and found an amulet that released a cursed monk, pleading, laughing hysterically for help. It was kind of at this time I thought to myself, man, it's taken me a long time to get through this wing of the ruin. And that's when I got a notification. The cave-in was cleared. Oh, sweet, the gnomes made their way through it all. Let's go see what's up. Upon arriving back to the main chamber, it was desolate. No gnomes, no dwarves, all that was left was a dead body on the floor. True soul Nier. Whoops. This was a stark reminder that time matters in this game. It won't always sit around and wait for you. Taking too much time exploring and taking too many long rests actually have negative impacts on the world around the player. And this is one of the great strengths of this game in my opinion. Time limits raise the stakes. So many games try to verbally express that the world is ending, but in game nothing really changes. That is not the case in Baldur's Gate. Nir's body had a few belongings on him, most curiously this strange lantern with pixie dust in it. Well, since Nir died, I guess it's time to roll out of the Underdark and regroup up above. Once above, we ran into an old woman being harassed by two men, claiming this old woman kidnapped their sister, who then vanished into thin air. Curious. A bit later, we ran into a sweet pup whose owner unfortunately passed away. I will now dedicate my life to this dog. I decided it's time to pursue Wyll's personal quest. He has some demon he's hunting down, so that sounds interesting, I guess. So let's go do that. We followed a blood trail of gnolls and humans to a toll house where several paladins of Tyr claimed they were hunting down the same demon as us, Karlach. We finally tracked down Karlach, and she wasn't what I expected. Instead of this menacing demon, I'm facing this quirky and adorable tiefling who turns out to be a fantastic person. Karlach was actually enslaved to Zariel to serve her, and then fled to escape a life of evil and servitude to a devil. She also explained that the paladins of Tyr, who we just met, are actually servants of Zariel that were sent to retrieve her. Karlach and Wyll made amends and realized they're a lot more alike and aligned on their values than they ever realized. So, with the addition of Karlach, we now have a full squad finally. It's time for us to go crack some skulls, starting with the so-called paladins of Tyr.
The furnace was never my home. It was my prison. I'm free now, and I'm never going back!
After a tough fight with the paladins, Karlach, in a fit of rage and possibly joy, completely thrashed the toll house. After Karlach calmed down, she explained that she was modified in Avernus and given an infernal engine for a heart.
Lets me burn as hot as the hells.
This will be important for later. Shortly down the road, we ran into a couple of traders who were caught in a nasty fight with a pack of gnolls. These freaking hyenas were hard to kill. Legitimately the toughest fight I'd faced so far. After taking a few reloads to kill all the hyenas, the chest the traders were guarding had an interesting item inside of it, an iron flask. After all was said and done, it was time for a rest, and we had a special visitor in camp.
Wyll, you've been naughty.
Mizora.
And his leash needs a yank.
Look, I'm not a guy who's like into video game characters or even anime characters, but look, Mizora can get it. Anyhow, Mizora is Wyll's patron. Speaking of patrons, you can sign up for my Patreon. I'm just kidding, I don't have a Patreon. So, Wyll is a warlock, and unlike sorcerers who have natural magical abilities or wizards who study spell tomes to gain their powers, warlocks gain their magical prowess by entering a pact with a powerful patron. In this case, Mizora. She grants Wyll magical abilities as long as he holds up the end of his deal, which in this case was to hunt down other devils.
Targets shall be limited to the infernal, the demonic, the heartless, and the soulless.
And now that Wyll has broken his pact by allying with Karlach, he will suffer a punishment. In this case, Mizora in an instant drops Wyll through the realms of hell, and he reforms as part devil himself, now adorning horns.
His soul passes through each layer of the hells, gaining their essence and their torment.
That's better.
Once Mizora left, it was time to rest, and upon waking up we had another guest, but this time, the goodest boy around, Scratch. After leaving camp, we wandered down the road a bit and heard some commotion. Smoke filled the air, and we entered a villa-like area currently being burnt to the ground.
Can't you see the inn is burning? Help, or get out of the way!
From the burning timber, I helped rescue a woman named Counselor Florick, who recognized Wyll and informed us that Duke Ravengard was captured by Drow and taken to Moonrise Tower. We learned that Duke Ravengard is Wyll's father and a counselor and champion of Baldur's Gate and the leader of the Flaming Fist. Important guy. Okay, we really need to get to Moonrise Tower. We can either find the passage to the Underdark and have to go through the Shadowlands, which are supposed to be extremely perilous, or travel the overland route through the mountain pass. So I headed towards the mountain pass and saw a tiefling named Elika who told me to get down and look ahead. At the bridge blocking the pass stood a group of extremely high-leveled Githyanki and a dragon. Seeing that I killed Lae'zel like a rat stuck in a cage earlier, I assumed they wouldn't be exactly welcoming, so I guess it's time to head back to the Underdark. While wandering the Underdark looking for the passage to the Shadowlands, I ran into a collection of petrified people. I poured a basilisk elixir on them I found in a nearby chest, and all hell broke loose. The fight with the spectator was tough, but the hardest part was then going right into a fight with the group of Drow who are trying to track down the adamantine forge. It took me several reloads to win both fights, and I realized that no matter what's said to the Drow, the fight can't be avoided, which is kind of disappointing. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, I didn't realize the passage out of the Underdark was literally just an elevator. I explored every square inch of the Underdark looking for like a cavern or a tunnel or a passageway, and I just could not find it. However, while doing so, I got into some shenanigans. I met the fishmen worshipping Bilal. I found Auntie Ethel's secret passage. I killed a Brulette, which is basically a giant armored mole. I found a Myconid village full of humanoid fungus people. Also inside was a friendly hobgoblin named Blurg and a mind flayer named Omelette. Also in the Myconid colony was this disgusting thing called Sovereign Glut that I did a quest for. I saved the guy from the Bibberbang. Got attacked by hook horrors, which were really freaking tough. Found an arcane tower I couldn't figure out how to get into. I assume I'm either stupid or it's a Gale thing. Finally exhausted and frustrated that I hadn't found the passage to the Shadowlands, I went back over to Grimforge and I found a door in like 2 seconds. After watching back my footage and watching other people's videos about Act 1, it made me realize I basically did the Underdark completely backwards compared to most people. But hey, that's what's so great about this game. The freedom to tackle it however you want, however seems fit, and it just made sense to me to go about it this way, I guess. Act 1 of the game reads like a funny fantasy adventure. Most of it is spent fighting funny little goblins and exploring this beautiful and interesting landscape. Act 2 is like descending into a horror movie, a dark and dystopian world that completely contrasts the one on the other side of the passage.
I don't know what I expected, but damn, this place is cursed.
Those shadows. There's power coursing through them.
The Shadowlands are straight up horrifying. The ambience, the appearance, and sound, it's haunting and it puts you on edge about what's lurking inside the shadows. Walking through the Shadowlands, we had to be armed with light to avoid the shadow curse.
Keep to the light!
We ran into a group of harpers traveling through the dark. As we talked, one of the harpers was dragged into the shadows. As we fought the shadow figures, whenever someone was killed, they would get turned into a evil version of themselves.
Jonas.
After the fight, we all made our way to the Last Light Inn, the only bastion of hope inside the Shadowlands, entirely unaffected by the curse. Upon entering the Last Light Inn, the shadows broke and we were confronted by a druid woman named Jahira. Jaheira begins to interrogate me, and as things are heating up, Mole, a tiefling child from the Druids Grove that we helped earlier in Act 1, comes in and vouches for me. I told Jaheira all we know about the artifact, and she finally lets her guard down. Once Jaheira walks away, Karlach then begins to completely fangirl over her.
Personally, I mean, I wish. She's an absolute legend.
Talking about how her mom used to tell her stories about her helping save Baldur's Gate from Saravok, a ball spawn. This will be important later. Shadowheart briefly mentions that the shadow curse doesn't seem to be affecting her, most likely because Lady Shar must have her guiding hand of protection upon her. It was really cool walking into the Last Light Inn and seeing a bunch of tieflings from the Druids Grove. Jaheira then tries to spike our wine, but not with poison, but a truth serum of sorts. She's concerned that the parasite that infected all of us is going to change us into flayers in the moment. She informs us that the cult of the Absolute is growing and churning inside the city of Baldur's Gate. Moonrise Tower and the cult of the Absolute are being helmed by General Ketheric Thorm. So, let's talk about Ketheric. Ketheric Thorm and his family were worshippers of Selûne for generations. Ketheric's wife died, then years later his daughter Isabel also died. Ketheric then turned to Shar and became Shar's chosen. During the year 1391, he raised an army of dark justiciars and they released the shadow curse across the land surrounding Moonrise Tower. A group of harpers and druids featuring Jaheira and Halsin locked Ketheric away. The god of the dead, Miracle, appeared to Ketheric later on and promised to bring back his daughter Isabel if he would sacrifice his body and soul to Miracle. So now, Ketheric has returned, having been resurrected by Miracle, and is amassing an army of the Absolute to march on Baldur's Gate. Isabel was also resurrected as promised, but despised what her father had become and denied him. With our protection of the artifact, we can pose as a true soul, infiltrate Moonrise Tower, and find Ketheric's sources of power and figure out what's causing his invulnerability. After Jaheira gave us the lowdown, I immediately turned to Shadowheart because this extremely evil dude apparently worshipped the same god as her. And this is where the player starts to learn that there's a little more inner turmoil going on with Shadowheart than meets the eye, and truthfully her morals and intents start to become a bit questionable if the same god that she worships is responsible for this forsaken land. Quick side note, Speak with Animals is the greatest spell in the game. It makes you feel like you're playing an entirely separate set of content that a ton of players probably miss out on. Okay. After talking with Jaheira, I made my rounds through the Last Light Inn. This is where your actions and choices in Act 1 finally show out. Since we saved the tieflings, a majority of them are here, but noticeably quite a few are missing. Alfira recounts the horrible story about how they were ambushed by cultists of the Absolute, and the only reason any of them were able to escape is because of Roland, a tiefling who in Act 1 I persuaded to stay and travel with the party to help them reach Baldur's Gate. Thus far, this is probably the most notable impact choice has had on my game. Letting Truesoul and Nair die in the Grimforge meant nothing because I was going to have to kill them anyways, but the tieflings are tangible. If not for my choice to help them in the Grove and convincing Roland to stay, which at the time seemed to be a completely unimportant conversation, I would guess that this inn would be nearly empty. We find Roland and he is obscenely drunk and pissed. His sister and brother are part of the group that got taken by the cultists, and he resents us for convincing him to ever stay and denies our offers of help to find them. We walk across the inn and well, look who's also sitting in the end, Raphael. He's sitting at a table playing a chess-like game with a tiefling child named Mole. After teaching Mole a lesson in the game, Raphael proceeds to say something extremely creepy and disturbing about Mole.
What a lovely specimen she is. A blushing apple begging to be plucked.
Please let me smack this creep.
Raphael is the ultimate deceiver and weaver of words. This interaction is basically sowing seeds for a later run-in. After Raphael vanishes, Wyll warns us to be careful about negotiating with the devil and that we should try to look out for Mole to protect her soul. Finally, after our rounds in the inn, the crew headed upstairs to receive a blessing from Isabel, the cleric of Selûne. And at the time, I definitely didn't realize that this was Ketheric's daughter. And I'm not sure if it's said or just implies, but I just didn't realize it. Side note, not sure if this is negative or positive, but it feels like everyone in this game basically wants to have sex with you. Like, they all talk with a flirty or sultry tone.
It's almost too good to be true. But I'd be a poor cleric indeed not to avail of a blessing.
Maybe it's just me, but women definitely don't talk to me like this in real life. Maybe it's me. Isabel casts a protection spell on us to lessen the effects of the shadow curse. Shadowheart scoffs at the Selûnite magic, and something hurts her hand when it's cast.
It hurts.
All throughout the first act, I kind of perceived Shadowheart as this like mega devout Catholic goth girl, because I really didn't understand much about Lady Shar, but in Act 2 it kind of made me realize Shadowheart's kind of a bitch. This guy named Flamin' Fist Marcus comes swooping with his rad-ass looking wings. Isabel knows Marky Mark, and he's supposed to bring her back to Ketheric. She says, hey, he's not going to give you what he wants. Marcus Aurelius says he already did, and he unfurls these nasty looking buzzard wings. Apparently Bismarcky isn't a good negotiator. How many Mark references did I fit in there? So, let's talk about the elephant in the Baldur Gate shaped room. Save scumming. Look, you've worked up the dough for the game, you can play it however you see fit, but objectively playing the dice as it lies, so to speak, creates a much more interesting story. However, I do get that some people might play video games to feel a sense of control or authority in their own life, and huge components of a game being randomized through dice rolls or outcomes having huge variability may make them frustrated or uneasy. For me, it's one of the reasons why I love this game so much. The chaotic energy of dice rolls and how making one single mistake can completely derail the projected storyline that was being written in my head makes every choice so exciting. All that being said, this is basically the only time I really save scum in the game, and it was kind of on accident. So, Marcus is here to capture Isabel and return her to Ketheric. Once the player disagrees to help Marcus, he howls and winged horrors descend upon Lae'zel in a frenzy. During the assault, Mole, the same tiefling who was talking to Raphael, gets snatched up by a horror and taken away. And I'll let you know now, I completely forgot Mole existed from this point on, and she was never seen again, and I didn't help her. Marcus and the horrors knock Isabel unconscious, and the orb of protection around Lae'zel collapses, and all of the Harpers become infected with the shadow curse and begin to attack us. I tried multiple times defeating the Harpers, and I just kept dying to them after Isabel was kidnapped, so like I kind of assumed that, oh, maybe I was supposed to defeat Marcus and the horrors before they could even knock out Isabel. I didn't really even realize what I had done until talking to one of my buddies who was around the same spot as me in the game, and he was like, wait, you managed to save the inn? And then I realized I'd prematurely scummed myself. After defeating Marcus, all the commotion settles down, and Karlach recognizes a tiefling smith named Damon. He told us that with some infernal iron he could help patch up Karlach and make her touchable again. Also, this ox is super messed up, and I'll leave it at that. Inside the wing of the inn is Counselor Florick, the same woman we rescued earlier from a burning building in Act 1. Also, there's a guy in a complete daze singing songs in bed. Florick mentions requesting reinforcements from Lord Gortash. Karlach quickly pipes up that he is who sold her into slavery to Zariel, and the last time I checked, slavery isn't cool. Wyll is shocked to hear Gortash is now such a high-ranking officer, and also that he created something called the Steel Watch. That night we were visited by Mizora once again. She told Wyll he needs to rescue one of Zariel's assets from the Absolutist. We ended up negotiating for Wyll's freedom that if he completes this mission for Mizora, he'll be free. I almost actually never used followers in RPGs. Followers in games are typically brain dead and serve more as like a human shield and walking chest. But the follower quest in this game for each one is just something I would love to see more in RPGs implemented in the future. They have their own goals, their own ambitions, and it makes them feel much more lifelike and realistic and worth having around. While sleeping, I got to visit my guardian. Yo, dog, chill. I haven't mentioned her a ton because, well,
I forgot, and she's really not that interesting to me. All I understood about her currently is she wants me to use the Flare parasites to enhance my abilities, and she isn't forthcoming about what's going on, but has some sort of protection over me. I just wasn't sold on the whole parasite thing. Like, I thought it was a trap, basically. Later on, Shadowheart and I brained up, and she shared a memory from her childhood of being attacked by a wolf, and a bunch of Sharan worshippers saved her and took her in as a child. Some Harper scouts told us that the Absolutists were making passage to Moonrise, and we should set up an ambush. This daddy long leg is walking with a lantern leading a group. I stepped out to talk to him, and he recognizes me as a true soul because of my tadpole. These are the moments when I love being a rogue or just skilled in deception. I managed to trick Karnis into giving me his lantern by saying the Absolute said, "Give it to me." Rolled a nat 20, then I told him to kick rocks and walk into the darkness. He tried to call my bluff, and I rolled a second natural 20, and the cultists marched into the darkness and were completely consumed.
I'd never believe it if I hadn't just seen it. Nicely done.
I picked up the lantern that Spider Boy was carrying. After examining it, turns out there's a pixie trapped inside named Dolly. She pleads for me to let her out, and I don't, and instantly turns quite hostile.
I'll gut you like a 10-day-old if you don't release me right this moment!
Suppose that's fair. Karlach and Wyll are disappointed in me, but Shadowheart for some reason likes it. She's messed up, man. I did a few minutes later decide to release her and got a blessing from her that I assume has the same effects as the lantern. While wandering through the ruins of the Shadowlands, we found Arabella, the young tiefling who in the Druid Grove was nearly killed by Kaga's viper. Turns out, she's kind of a beast. She was wandering around looking for her parents and agrees to go hang out at our camp while I look for them. Now, the next scene is probably the most freaking insane encounter I had in the entire game. Like, I might have to censor some of it because it's so gruesome. We walked into an area, ironically, called the House of Healing. Inside, a grotesquely scarred man named Malus Thorm is teaching surgery to a group of nurses while using a literal live man as his test subject. Now, he clearly has the same last name as the main antagonist, Ketheric Thorm, and I couldn't find any information to what his relationship to Ketheric is. An article I read said that he's Ketheric's uncle, but I don't know where they even got that information from. There are a few other Thorm family members we will get to later that are equally unclear in their relations. At first I thought it was neat and added some intrigue, but it ended up kind of annoying me that there wasn't any information about these people's relationship to the most pivotal character in the story so far. He tells them that the scalpel is an extension of Shar, and by cutting this man in the right way, they're actually bringing him pleasure. Malus is freaky, but it's the nurses in this scene that are straight up frightening. They sway hauntingly back and forth, their hands shake while they wear some type of strange, blinding headdress. He then explains that pain leads to peace and begins stabbing the test subject in the eyes. And what do you know? Shadowheart agrees with him. What is wrong with her? Malus says that blindness is the true way to worship Shar because darkness brings absence, and wants to poke out our only good eyeball we have left. I convinced him by rolling a 22 over a 21 DC that the sisters aren't ready to perform surgery on me and they should practice on one another. All four of them then proceed to literally slaughter each other. Dude, this was straight up like watching a horror movie. He still wants me to pluck my eye out, so I convince him that I need to see a demonstration on himself. Then I would perform my own. With a DC check of 21, I rolled a 27. We got hot dice, baby. Malus then curls back his hand and shoves his Edward Scissorhand fingers directly into his own eye sockets and hits the deck like a sack of taters. What just happened? So, these psychos were worshippers of Shar. Clearly, Shadowheart has something to say about this whole encounter.
I was hoping you'd come to chat. What do you need?
Nope. Nothing. This is so disappointing. Through Act 2, my entire perception of Shadowheart is rapidly changing, and this insanely massive event just happens in front of us, and she has nothing to say about it. Like, I was at least hoping she'd be like, look, we aren't all freaks like that. Don't you worry about me. I won't pluck your eyes out. Instead, she has looked over the situation as nothing out of the ordinary, which is horrifying and mainly annoying. If you walk around the House of Healing, you'll find and see some horrible things. I found a note which was a betting pool from the staff who were placing bets on what was shoved up a patient's anal cavity. Now, back at the Last Light Inn, we gave Damon a piece of infernal iron, and he performed one of the first repairs to help cool down Karlach. Arabella made it to camp. It's very cute. She's, to no one's surprise, has zero fear of withers, and is just sitting there interrogating him about what he is. And at camp, Halsin finally pipes up. I have no idea what he's been doing this entire time, but he says he may be able to lift the shadow curse if he can find a child named Thaniel, who is the spirit of the land. All this information was given to us by that bedridden flaming fist member we managed to wake up after playing a magical lute that we found on Malice Thorm's body. Halsin talked to Art Kula, and he told Halsin what little he could remember about where to find Thaniel. Halsin then told me to meet him down by the lake shore. He said he's going to open the portal to the Shadowfell to retrieve Thaniel, and he needs me to stay outside and defend it. This is it. Halsin could cleanse the shadows from the land, and once he enters a portal, a variety of shadow monsters begin lurching towards the portal. I mean, a lot of enemies showed up. A turn counter pops up on the screen for how long I need to defend the portal until Halsin returns. Yeah, I died. And so did Halsin. Another scenario where I would really love to save scum, but I did not. We gotta roll with the consequences. The group set off to find some more infernal iron and continue exploring the Shadowfell. We were about to enter a dungeon, and Raphael is there waiting for us. He says some lame, foreboding limerick that Karlach makes fun of him for.
They dug, which he himself fed.
Ooh, spooky.
Which is nice that even in Baldur's Gate 3, people think someone talking like Shakespeare trying to be edgy is a total dork. I tell him to paint me a picture of what we're going to encounter. Still speaking riddles and rhymes, Raphael warns us about what we're entering into. I don't know why this made me laugh so hard that I can persuade him to paint me an even clearer picture because I ain't getting it.
Very well. There is a creature that lurks in silence and shadow. A creature who, like me, is very much of the infernal persuasion.
He then flat out says, hey, there's a devil down there that if it gets out will be a plague on the world above for me and everyone. You can tell that Raphael does in fact fear whatever is down below there though. Inside, next to the Thorm Masoleum, a talking skull waits for us called the Herald of Balthazar that says something about carrying General Thorm's will alone. Upon a desk, I also found a note saying, hidden beneath the crypt is a Temple of Shar. The developers really packing it in this area. We took the magic elevator down, and now we are at the Gauntlet of Shar. The Gauntlet is supposed to be an extreme test for the Lady Shars chosen to see if they're worthy of becoming a Dark Justiciar. It looks like Shadowheart will be the next participant in the Gauntlet. God, disarming traps in this game gets so exhausting sometimes. Most of the time in an area where you find traps, there's going to be like 15 of them. I would have preferred the traps in this game to be lower in like quantity, but just do insane amount of damage than having to disarm a ton of them that are just like a moderate inconvenience. In the temple, we ran into some unique enemies like the Cloaker, this phantasmal like manta ray, which I thought was pretty neat. Also, there are thousands of rats in this place. They are all worshipping the shrines of Shar, and if you cast Speak with Animals and talk to them, which is the greatest spell in the entire game, they call you an intruder, an invader, and unworthy to be in the halls. During this time, I led my party with Shadowheart down here. It just felt like, for the story, it kind of fit the moment to let her being the one leading us through the Temple of Shar. We walked into a chamber, and a reconstituted duelist spoke to me. Through the tadpole, it was revealed that he is actually being manipulated by someone else like a puppet. The ground begins to quake, and he yells that they've found me, and a group of Justiciar Avengers are upon us. After the fight, we found the puppet master of the undead, Balthazar.
Balthazar is the chief advisor to General Thorm and probably the most disgusting character in this game. Balthazar is here to retrieve a relic for Thorm. He, thinking I'm a true soul, wants to enlist my help, and I persuaded him to tell me what the relic is, and he foolishly reveals it is what leads to Ketheric's invulnerability. And he also gave me a bell to summon this big dumb idiot. We found the last piece of infernal iron so quickly, fast traveled back to Daemon to have Karlach fixed up, and her flame is contained now, but not permanently, and she could eventually break down and die. Her only real chance of survival would be to return to Avernus so she doesn't burn from the inside out, but she's not willing to do that. Back at the temple, we follow this strange cat-like beast into a room full of hanging corpses, and here he is, Yuergir, Raphael's old friend.
Fresh for this place, aren't you? There's a whiff of the surface to you.
Yuergir even recognizes Karlach as a servant of Zariel due to her machinery, and he can tell that her internal engine is going to explode soon. He can somehow smell that we talked to Raphael.
Raphael! I can smell him all over you. Where is he?
It turns out that Yuergir is actually trapped down here by Raphael. Being a rogue, it gives me the dialogue option to prod into what has him trapped here. He repeats a riddle, which is the contract that Raphael created to trap him inside this lair.
Spill all the blood sworn to the night. Silence all prayers. Smother each right. Wander Shar's halls, hungry to slay. Leave no justice here, alive to obey. Leave none to hear it, then be set free. This song is your oath. Swear it to me.
Well, that explains where all the Dark Justiciars went.
Yuergir slaughtered all the Sharan Dark Justiciars in the temple, so he believes. He then mentions that Raphael mentioning an Asimir and says it means nothing to him though. Very good foreshadowing. I was able to persuade him that his followers with him are a part of the problem of him not fulfilling his contract, and he tells them to kill themselves and go back to hell. Now his next part made me actually sad. I then convinced him that he also needs to kill his displacer, his cat named Nessa. You can tell this actually hurt him a bit, which is strange to feel a humanizing emotion towards this devil.
My beauty.
I then told him, hey, kill yourself. that didn't work. Yuergir was a tough fight because he starts with the high ground and goes invisible, and it's super tough. I had to shoot him repeatedly with different arrows that would break his invisibility, and then right as he was beginning to die, he released an onslaught of bombs all around himself, but they were easy to dodge. So, Yuergir is done. Okay, we got Karlach's Infernal Iron and killed Raphael's demon. Now, back to Shadowheart. It's weird to me that they just put so many quest objectives in one location. To be fair, it's a huge area, but it seems a bit coincidental that every single loose end basically funnels into this one area beneath Ketheric's tomb. From Shadowheart's quest to Karlach's Iron, Raphael's quest, finding the Night Song, Ketheric's quest, and Balthazar. To be fair, it's an important area, and something very special is hidden away that is still yet to be found. So, Shadowheart decides now is a good time to mention she's supposed to sacrifice someone, and needs a specific spear to do so. Well, it looks like Wyll's getting skewered. While exploring, I found a pentagram and a broken effigy, which I'm pretty sure has to do with all the rats, but I never quite figured it out. The Gauntlet of Shar was pretty mediocre. The sneak test was boring. Fighting your shadow cells was really hard as a group. I then reloaded once I died and went back in solo with Shadowheart, and it was super easy. The leap of faith test took me a second to realize the leap part was very literal. You must jump for it to work and you can't walk. And after finishing the gauntlet, it was time to get the spear. We wandered down to the silent library, which has a silent spell casted over it, so no spells work inside. Get it? Silent library. After figuring out a puzzle, we found the spear. Although I did find the Gauntlet of Shar disappointing, it's been cool watching Shadowheart get stronger and upgrade gear. She is typically always the weakest member of my party, so finding all the different Justiciar pieces for her felt rewarding. With the spear in hand, we made our way to the entrance of the Shadowfell. Upon trying to dip our toes into the water, a warning pops up. Are you sure you want to proceed? Depending on your choices, the state of the region could change and some active quests may become unavailable. I kind of wish they didn't include the pop-up warnings in this game. I get why they did, because there are some players who would be like outraged if they made an irreversible choice that they didn't realize that would have locked them out of content. But I feel like it blocks the flow of the game so hard. The majority of this game is about how your choices made on the fly affect the potential outcome, and this feels like the antithesis of that. It would be better if verbally the narrator warned you and it just hit you with an option: enter now or accept thy fate, or turn back and reflect on these decisions, instead of like a written out warning like, hey, you're going to get locked out of content. Since I was warned that I was going to get locked out of content, it made me feel like, okay, well, I got to go back and explore the Shadowlands more because maybe I'm missing something. So, I found this big fat gold lady, and I convinced to kill herself. Jeez. Man, my rogue has convinced a lot of people to do terrible things to themselves. I rescued Roland from some shadow figures while he was out trying to find his siblings. I then accidentally found my way into the back entrance of Moonrise Tower. I really enjoyed infiltrating Moonrise Tower the first time. I was constantly on edge always, being fearful that I was going to say the wrong thing and blow my cover, and it felt like a real espionage mission, not just like skulking in the shadows and sneaking around, but trying to pretend to be somewhere I don't belong. Inside Moonrise is full of Absolutists meandering about, all different races and backgrounds. A really cool detail is that Roa Moonglow, who's a merchant that was in the Goblin encampment, that flees the second we started killing off the goblins. She is there at Moonrise Tower, and she kind of coyly mentions that, hey, you know, too bad neither of us saw anything. Basically very aware that we killed all the goblins, but she couldn't care less because the only reason she's even part of the cult is because she's making money selling them items. Further in the main hall, we finally laid eyes on Ketheric Thorm. Him and his second-in-command disciple Z'rell are in the middle of dressing down 3 goblins who failed to recover the artifact under Mithara's orders. The artifact that happens to be in our possession. Ketheric asked for our opinion on the matter. Side note, J.K. Simmons voicing Ketheric is really, really cool, man. He should play more villains, and he just does such a great job. I tried to advocate for the freedom of the goblins, but Ketheric orders them to be killed.
I can coddle failure no longer. Kill them, quickly.
In an instant, one of the goblins hurls a guard's axe directly into Ketheric's chest. He then removes the axe as a black liquid drips out, and drops it at the goblin's feet and says,
"Try again."
She slings the axe into his neck and he rips it out and hammer fists her into the ground like a Goomba. For the first time, seeing the true invulnerability and power that he possesses, it was crazy. After all this transpires, he leaves the execution of the other 2 goblins in my hands and walks away. I decided to set them 2 free because, frankly, I don't care what they do, but it kind of felt like the right thing to do. Fezerk was in Act 1, and he was actually the goblin who was torturing a deep gnome on the windmill. And you could decide to kill him there. Obviously, I didn't, but it really makes me wonder what would have happened with meeting Ketheric for the first time in an alternate playthrough if Fezerk was already dead. Like, how would this play out of meeting Ketheric? Upstairs, Z'rell probes through my brain in a test-like situation where I had to pass a few deception rolls. She talks a bit about the Absolute, who we are at the current moment still unaware of who that actually is. Then she tells us we need to go help Balthazar, which we already met that guy, so I guess it's back to that. Turns out, all roads basically lead us to the Temple of Shar. Before leaving, though, we need to make a stop in the dungeon and see if we can find our tiefling friends who are taken captive. In the dungeon, we found the tieflings imprisoned, and Roland's 2 siblings, Leah and Cal, were standing at the gate. Talking to her, she hit me with the classic zinger telling me that Zevlor and I should take a long walk off a short cliff. It seems like Zevlor, their former leader, had betrayed them. Cal mentions that the gnomes the next cell over are definitely making an escape plan, and we should see what we can do and see what we can find out from the gnomes. Right as I begin to talk to the deep gnome Wulbren, a guard approaches, questioning our intentions down in the dungeon, saying that prisoners are only to be interacted with by Balthazar. I lied, passing the deception check, that Balthazar himself sent me down here. The deep gnome was impressed with how I handled the guard and heard me out. I told him I'd aid in their escape if they helped the tieflings escape as well. Before giving them an implement to escape, I surveyed the area to figure out the best plan of attack. In a secluded tower near the prison cells, I found the warden. While talking to her, I tried to probe into her mind and read her thoughts, and I rolled a natural 1, and instantly we're throwing hands.
You are no true soul. I'll kill you, traitor.
She decided to very cleverly climb up a ladder, which then just allowed me to shove her through a window into the abyss. I was a bit mortified that I may have completely just botched the entire tiefling rescue, but I think I can make this work. I quickly dispatched the scrying eye, which I'll be honest, I don't even know what I don't know what these do. Then the warden is dead. There are only 2 guards left, the one on patrol and this big beefy guy who seems pretty content to just stand on post in the far corner of the jail and not really do anything. I needed to toss something through the jail cell for the gnomes to use to break rock without the guards seeing. I already had a pickaxe in my inventory, so logically I threw that through the cell, and he goes, no, this won't work. I need something that can break rock. One of the few times in this game where I feel like you find an oversight like this. They basically were acquiring something that classifies as a blunt weapon to break the rock, and the pickaxe does piercing damage, so it doesn't work. So once the guard walks past, I throw a mace into the cell, and I followed her to the far side of the jail, and when the guards were as separated as possible, I killed Adept Caris. While I was fighting, the gnomes and tieflings made their breakthrough. They escaped, but the quest wasn't progressing. It took me a minute to realize that I actually need to follow them into the tunnel and continue assisting in their escape. We found a boat tied up, and all of us packed into the boat and set course to Last Light Inn. Upon returning to Last Light, they performed a test on all the new refugees to make sure they aren't infected by parasites or secretly cultists. This was a nice little touch to add the legitimacy of the Harper setup. It's super rewarding and sweet to see all the tieflings reunited with their loved ones, and I appreciate that they even went as far to set up little cutscenes for them as well. And this is where the game constantly over-delivers on effort, is setting up scenes for 2 characters that I have legitimately no impact on the game, but they still get a nice loving reuniting. Inside the inn, Alfira and Lacrissa are reunited, and we get a pretty decent reward for rescuing the tieflings. Roland and his siblings are finally reunited, and they are arguing about what happened, but clearly they're just overwhelmed with emotions and really grateful to see each other. And this felt like a very real sibling interaction. Roland softens up a bit, and he thanks us for rescuing his siblings and gives us a big pile of gold. I was a bit disappointed with just getting gold from Roland. He's this really interesting wizard who has a temper and is clearly extremely intelligent, and it would have been cool to receive some type of unique magical item from him instead of gold, which at this point in the game isn't hard to come by at all. Now all that is done, it's back to Shadowfell. Once we entered, we are surprised by the grease hog Balthazar, who basically admits that he just used us to slip past Shar's defense to get in here, and that Lady Shar was preventing him from entering due to his allegiance with Ketheric Thorm, who turned from Shar and now serves Merkel. At the bottom of this Sharan rock-filled void, we finally laid eyes on the Night Song, which turns out not to be a relic at all, but a lady named Aelin. She is magically imprisoned here, and she quickly snaps at Shadowheart's presence that he brought a dark justiciar to her. Balthazar wants to bring her back to Ketheric so he can keep her under a tighter lock. Nightsong says,
I welcome the sight of him after these 100 years. He whose immortality I supply with my very soul.
This felt like, I don't know, a bit on the nose for me, but I suppose it was at least a concise way to explain that her soul is bound in providing the immortality for Ketheric. I attacked Balthazar to stop him from taking the Night Song, and he summoned a freaking army of undead, and I got crushed, real quick. So, it loaded my last save right before I entered the Shadowfell, and it made me think, I wonder if Balthazar is still in that little room upstairs. And what do you know? There he is. So I exploded the whole entire room, and then it took me a while to beat down Big Brutus, the flesh golem. And these are the moments in the game where I struggle with, is this like cheating or save scumming? After dying, I'm forced to reload, but I now have new information to attack the situation. In most games, when you die fighting a boss, you just think, okay, well, I definitely need to avoid this attack next time, and maybe instead I use this weapon. Dying to a boss is a learning process that just sets you up to tackle it better on a reload, but with Baldur's Gate, there's so much freedom in the game that sometimes it can feel a bit scummy or like you're taking the easy way out of the situation. I will say, now with Balthasar dead, I felt so much relief. His character honestly sickened me in a weird way. His appearance and the way that he talked, I found it super disgusting. I hated that he always looked greasy. The scarring of the pentagram on his face, he talked vulgarly and grotesquely, and it was really kind of strange. It was one of the few times in a game where like the character in the video game made me uncomfortable in real life, and I would say that's kind of really, really good character design if it was able to make me feel that way. Now, back in the Shadowfell, Balthasar is dead, and then Nightsong angrily scolds Shadowheart, telling her that killing her and becoming a dark justiciar will only bring loss. The narrator informs you that because Shadowheart's relationship with the player is so good, that she could be swayed, and also the Nightsong could feel that, and despite her rage, she knows her fate hangs in the balance with our ability to persuade Shadowheart. This whole encounter had me on the edge of my seat while I was playing. Shadowheart started as this edgy but sweet religious girl that as our relationship has progressed, we've grown closer, and you learn how hurt and damaged she really is. And then it slowly begins to morph as we understand more about her and her past. Shadowheart has been corrupted by the worship of Shar, but inside her is still a good heart fighting to break free. Nightsong persuades Shadowheart with the fact that the worship of Shar has stolen her memories and her life. She draws a spear out and throws it off the cliff, finally defying Lady Shar. Shadowheart lays her hands on Nightsong, which releases her from her binds, which I don't really understand why that frees Nightsong, but great. Nightsong dons her angelic armor and says it's time to kill Ketheric. Nightsong ascends from the temple and flies across the Shadowlands as her light passes over the Last Light Inn on her way to Moonrise Tower. Afterwards, Shadowheart is shell-shocked about what all had just occurred and a bit of disbelief that she actually denied Lady Shar. Leaving the Shadowfell, Shadowheart underwent an immense amount of pain and suffering and is now an outcast. At Last Light, we talked to Isabel, and she said Jaheira and the Harpers have launched an assault on Moonrise Tower. At the base of the tower, everyone is gathered to fight, while Nightsong flew to the top to fight Ketheric. Inside the main chamber, Ketheric's second-in-command, Zorel, awaited with an army of Absolutists. This was an extremely chaotic fight that took me probably close to like 8 reloads and 2+ hours of time. And these fights can be really fun at first, but after a while they're just so chaotic and drawn out, and it starts to just become frustrating. At some point, I finally busted out the iron flask I found in Act 1 and threw it. Turns out, there's a beholder in there. So that added to the chaos beautifully. After defeating Zorel and her goons, Jaheira held it down on the ground level while the squad proceeded upwards to fight Ketheric. I could have had Jaheira join me, but I felt this strange loyalty to Wyll, Karlach, and Shadowheart since they've been with me for so long at this point. Ketheric is on the rooftop furious at what we've done and tries to use the power of the Absolute to control us, and this is when he realizes that we have had the artifact in our possession this entire time. Nightsong now is referred to as Dame Aelin, and she is here, and she is pissed the heck off. Ketheric claims Aelin stole Isabel from him, and turns out Aelin is the daughter of Saloon, who is the Thorm family's former god that they used to worship, which is why Aelin's immortal. And when Ketheric says that she stole Isabel from her, Isabel was her lover. The fight with Ketheric is pretty tough. His armor is insane, so it makes landing hits on him really difficult, and his little necromites are a huge freaking pain in the ass. Once we have Ketheric on the ropes, a huge Nautiloid tentacle erupts from the ground and smites Aelin, and they both, like, dissolve, I guess. Jaheira pops up and says, hey, we better go chase after Ketheric and catch him before he gets away. I freaking hate this in video games. Multi-stage boss fights, spoiler alert, This is one of 3 stages. They can be done right and can be interesting, and this Ketheric one isn't too bad. A lot of games, it just feels like this is their way of making a boss tough by drawing out the process of defeating them as long as possible. It's just, I don't know, find a more unique way to make a boss difficult than just artificially lengthening the fight and making me beat him a bunch of times. So, we took a rest and then hopped down into a pink hole filled... We took a rest and we hopped into a pink void. Inside, we've entered into this grotesque mind flayer colony. Pink and red flesh line the walls of this strange cave, and inside there are people walking about. They are simply husk and under mind flayer control. In one of the chambers, we found a collection of trapped prisoners in pods. I released all of the pods, and a battle erupted of prisoners and mind flayers that have finally finished their transformation. The most interesting of the prisoners being old Zevlor. After the fight, Zevlor expresses his remorse for what happened with the tiefling refugees and says that he was manipulated by the Absolute, whispering into his mind, and that's why he betrayed them. We then found Mizora in a flare pod. She earlier asked us to rescue one of Zariel's assets, but turns out she's the asset. I didn't really get this unless we saw Mizora before, and it was just like an apparition of her appearing to us asking for help. While she's in the pod, I do have the option to kill her while she's trapped, but I decided to let her live. With rescuing her, Wyll is now free from his pact in 6 months. As a reward, she gave Wyll a sweet rapier. We approach a giant fleshy door, and the dream visitor pipes up, "This is it. The Absolute is behind this door." I thought this was kind of weird. I actually wasn't really even thinking about the Absolute at this moment. I was just pursuing Ketheric, so it was kind of a... I don't know, it just felt weird to me. Inside this chamber, there are 4 people. Ketheric, Inver Gortash, Orin, and Duke Ravengard, Wyll's father, who is their captive. The 3 are working together under their masters, who are the 3 respective gods that they all worship. Orin is a creep and just basically says edgy, violent things the entire conversation. They conveniently reveal a piece of their plan to me while talking amongst themselves, and we just kind of stand over near the doorway, I guess, and overhear it. I don't know. Ketheric is to amass an army to march onto Baldur's Gate and needs to get the Astral Prism, our artifact. They then do a Power Rangers-esque move, and an enormous brain emerges from the depths, and the narrator tells us that this is an Elder Brain, one of the cruelest and most powerful creatures, and they have enslaved it. They then infect Duke Ravengard with a parasite, and Gortash reveals a little more, that the whole army of the Absolute is marching on Baldur's Gate is totally for show, so that he can save the city and look like a hero. Then they teleport away. I don't quite understand why Gortash and Orin wouldn't have just stayed an extra 5 minutes to make sure I'm defeated and they get the Astral Prison, but that's neither here nor there, I suppose. Ketheric explains that Mrhol, his god, asked him to serve as his chosen, to work with Orin and Gortash and ultimately betray them in the end. Like I mentioned earlier, he is beholden to Mrhol because he resurrected his daughter Isabel and is indebted to him. The second round of fighting Ketheric is extremely tough. There's a powerful mind flayer zooting around. Ketheric does 1,000,000 damage, and the longer the fight goes on, the more and more necromites Ketheric spawns. In the back corner of the chamber is Dame Aelin being held prisoner, and releasing her as quickly as possible definitely helps make the fight a bit easier. Took me 3 or 4 tries to defeat Ketheric. He then trust falls into a yellow pit of sludge, and the voice of Mrhol begins to speak.
You dare end one who belongs to me. I am the smile of the world cleansed skull. I am the regrets of those who remain, and the restlessness of those who are gone.
This is another moment where it feels easy to take for granted how unbelievable the voice acting in this game is. I mean, it just feels light years ahead of any game I've ever played. this giant skeleton horror begins clawing his way out of the green void, and it was one of the greatest visual experiences in this game. This whole fight sequence took me forever. The Apostle of Mrhol was difficult, but not unbelievably hard. The true challenge was getting through the Ketheric fight and enough health to survive a few blows from the Apostle. Once the Apostle of Mrhol is defeated, Ketheric reappears in disbelief. A man who had gained immortality is now quickly waning away. As he drops to his knees, the last word he utters is Isabel. A reminder that at one time Ketheric wasn't this monster before us. Everything that happened and everything he had become was a sacrifice so his daughter could experience life once again. Well, then Aelin came over and curb stomped his lifeless corpse into a pulp, so that's nice. I rolled over Ketheric and popped his stone from his armor, and my guardian opened a portal and walks through it. She explains that the Absolute is in fact the Elder Brain we saw, and is being controlled by the three, Ketheric, Orin, and Gortash, with the use of these nether stones and that crown that was atop of the brain. And the crown is so powerful and imbued with magic that is most likely what's empowering the parasites in all the people that have been infected. Remember, we have a parasite in our brain. Because my character Faendal never used any of the parasites to enhance himself, I almost forgot that was even a thing. I haven't turned into a flare yet, nothing bad has happened, so it just never felt like a big deal. The Guardian finally explains that the Absolute is basically just a front for the dead three, Mrhol, Bane, and Baal, who have each chosen their respective champions to do their bidding. Even in Ketheric's defeat, the army of the Absolute still continues to march on Baldur's Gate. So, that's where we're heading next. After teleporting out, Karlach absolutely loses her mind about seeing Gortash again and says she has to be the one that kills him. Oh yeah, and Wyll's dad is now infected, and he's real concerned about it. I don't know if it's just because Wyll is a bit of a chode, but I just could not give less of a rat's ass about his dad. We then have to make our way through the Shadowlands towards Baldur's Gate. While exploring, I found a bar with this behemoth Fizbold Thorm, which may be Ketheric's bastard son, possibly. I convinced him to drink so much that he exploded. My character is a literal sociopath. He's convinced so many people to basically kill themselves. As we wind towards the path to lead the Shadowlands, I'm reminded that although we did kill Ketheric, we haven't really helped the Shadowlands themselves. The land is still tainted and poisoned. We could have done more to help the land, and we didn't. What I thought was this glorious triumph through the Shadowlands all of a sudden made me realize how self-focused I was.
You should be elated. The sight of the land you leave behind does nothing to alleviate your sorrow.
Besides helping Halsin, who I let die when he was trying to cleanse the land, I didn't even look into seeing if there's another way to do anything. I had my blessing of Saloon, so I was fine, so who cares? This made me reevaluate all my decisions I made and my moral standings while in the Shadowlands. I left the darkness behind me, feeling like I had let this place down. As I load into Act 3, I'm greeted to a cutscene between Gortash and Orin. This is one of the only moments in the game I can think of that the player is given information that they aren't even present for. I guess it was kinda necessary to expedite some of the plot points for the player's sake, but it just didn't really make much sense to me. They are surprised that I managed to kill Ketheric, and the Elder Brain is now causing earthquake-like tremors in the city due to it being hidden underground, and with Ketheric dead and the Netherstone missing, they are slowly losing control of the brain. The cutscene cuts back to camp, where we get a good view of the city ambling in the distance. While resting, the Absolute tries to speak to us and the astral prism begins freaking out, and at the same time, a portal opens up and a group of Githyanki monks emerge. A turn counter starts and says we need to get to the portal, and our dream visitor who has been guiding us and protecting us is under attack and needs our help. Entering into the astral plane felt like I had just loaded an entirely new video game.
Everything looks totally different and unique in here. They did an incredible job of making this place feel alien and otherworldly. One of the Gith-Yankees shatters this giant glass-like skull dome, and they are bearing down on our protector who's pleading for help from us. There's also low gravity in here, which is a nice touch, and adds a little bit of space element to this encounter. Inside we see a man in some type of astral bindings, then an enormous and ornate mind flayer named the Emperor. The Emperor lands at our feet after getting donkey kicked in the chest by a monk and says that he is our ally, and that the Gith-Yankee that is in bondage is the source of our protection from the Absolute, and we must stop them at all costs. The Flayer quickly recounts a list of our accomplishments thus far, an attempt to prove that he knows us and is our ally. There's a little funny action available here where I am able to attempt to read the Mind Flayer's thoughts using the parasite, and even with a successful roll, he's just baffled by our idiocy. It's like, hey, I'm literally telling you my thoughts right now into your brain. Knock it off. We proceed to fight the Gith monks, which, man, you don't encounter a lot of monks in this game, and I am thankful for that because they are freaking annoying to fight. After the fight, the Gith-Yankee hostage is subdued, and it's time for some explanations. The Emperor gives his backstory, explaining he wasn't always a Flayer. He was an adventurer just like you, who was captured by the Mind Flayers in Moonrise Tower and turned. He then was forced to worship the Elder Brain, aka the Absolute, but managed to break free, which isn't explained. He then rehabituated himself into Baldur's Gate under disguise. Then after a while, Gortash, of all people, found out his identity and slaved him again to the Elder Brain. So, I bet you're asking, how did the Emperor get free again? Well, Gortash sent out a bunch of Mind Flayers to search for the artifact, and the Emperor just so happened to be the one who found it. And when he picked it up, he gained free will. Again. The Gith-Yankee that is imprisoned is the son of one of their leaders who has the power to disrupt the Flayer hive mind communication. He is trapped inside the Astral Prism, the artifact that we've had since meeting up with Shadowheart, and it is what has kept us free from the Elder Brain's control. And by the way, if you haven't realized, we are currently inside the Astral Prism. The Emperor, I don't know, man. The Emperor just doesn't do it for me. He's basically like the Forrest Gump of Faerun. He just happened to conveniently cross every path we're going to. He's escaped mind control multiple times. He just happened to be the one who found the artifact. Flayers aren't even supposed to, like, remember who they were once they transform. They're supposed to lose all sense of their former self once they finish their transformation. So I don't even get how he knows about his previous life or any of his escapades. Also, the shock factor of what we thought was gonna be our smoking hot babe that we're gonna help turned out to actually be a Mind Flayer wasn't really all that surprising. It may have been because I consciously made a choice to not use any enlisted powers for my first run, and the entire time she's like trying to convince me, hey, use that tadpole, enhance yourself, and it put me on edge. It made me untrusting. So when we entered the Astral Prism and we saw the Flayer, I honestly didn't feel much shock or really anything. He then tries to convince me again, hey, I should become an enlisted because I'll have a better chance of defeating the Elder Brain. Still no for me, but he hands me another parasite that will complete the evolution if I so choose. Okay, finally, we've reached the outskirts of Baldur's Gate. Inside, the streets are littered with refugees and disgruntled townfolk. We found a circus around the corner. I don't know what the hell Benji is, but he rules.
Brain juice smells like piss and iron. No lie.
It was a cool experience to walk around the circus and see all of the interesting creatures that inhabit this land that we don't really get a chance to interact with in the game. In one of the cages is a displacer, the cat-like creature, which we saw one of these earlier when we were fighting the Orthorn. Casting Speak with Animals on it is actually very real and depressing, and probably what an animal trapped in a cage that small would be saying.
Every one of you is vicious, cruel. You kill my meat, steal my cups.
Her cellmate next door is a dinosaur-like creature that isn't quite as complex as his feline friend.
Press your flesh through bars.
I wandered over to this druid-like woman named Zethino, who acts like a fortune teller and love connector. She sets up Shadowheart and I to stare into each other's eyes and answer questions to prove our love. We're transported to the base of a waterfall, and my game bugged. What is supposed to be this romantic scene feels completely meaningless because Shadowheart is completely invisible. Then the women's words slowly turn dark, and she transforms into no one other than Orin. This actually freaked me out. Even though the cutscene we entered into Act 3 between her and Gortash did reveal, or spoil, however you want to look at it, that Orin can shapeshift, this still surprised the hell out of me and put me on edge. A few minutes after leaving the circus, I went to find a smith, and what do you know? Freaking Orin again. With Ketheric dead and one of the netherstones in my possession, Orin is basically ready to betray Gortash and warns me that his words are full of lies and deception, but her blade only speaks the truth. Oh my god, a baby flying elephant. I did quite a few side quests and missions in the Baldur's Gate area, and I'm not going to get into all of them, but as we go through, I'll highlight some here and there. On the outskirts of the city, we met a group of hunters who heard that I had slain Ketheric and have tasked me to hunt down a vampire Cazador who's stolen their children. I appreciate that they had the forethought to make it so this adventuring party would recognize that I had slayed Ketheric. There's nothing more irritating in video games when you have slayed dragons or these giant enemies and someone goes, "Oh yeah? What thinks you're qualified to fight this rat that's in our cellar?" At the foot of the bridge to enter Wyrms Crossing stands a steel watcher, Gortash's creations to help bring peace to the city. The watcher is able to examine us and see all of our deeds and determine whether we are worthy and safe to enter the city. After listing out what we've done thus far in the story, it deems me as an enemy of the Absolute, and we are to come quietly or die. As we're about to launch into a fight, one of the deep gnomes that we saved from prison alongside the tieflings comes sprinting forward and hurls an EMP-like explosive at the watcher's feet, and we all make a run for the city. This is one of those cool situations where it really makes me appreciate this game and makes me want to play it again, to think, okay, well, what would happen if I didn't save the gnomes? How would I get through this moment here? Entering Wyrms Crossing, which is part of the outskirts of the city of Baldur's Gate, it actually feels like a real city. The streets are littered with people, there's storefronts and merchants lining the road, and the city is enormous. I feel like a lot of games have trouble delivering on the grandeur of a city. They tell you it's the jewel of civilization or the capital, and it's amazing, and you go there and it has like 25 inhabitants. But this is actually a bustling mega city. I head down to a hidden cave beneath the city and I find the Iron Hand gnomes. We talk to Wulbren, their leader, who we also rescued from Moonrise, and he can see that with the Steel Watchers, Gortash is going to try and enslave the entire city, and he wants to take down the Steel Watch so we can have a fighting chance at taking down Gortash. He's made a rune powder bomb that we can use and take to the Steel Watch foundry and detonate. One nice little touch amongst the gnomes is Nichols. He says he can hear the earth screaming and that something is hiding beneath the city.
There's something underneath the city, inside the rock. But when I ask the stone why it shakes, it only screams.
Nice foreshadowing. Walking down the street, a fine establishment with a sign out front says, "Where our libations and sensual indulgences restore even the weariest souls." Well, I am quite weary. Maybe we'll just have a peek inside. Inside, the hostess tells of different servers available, and one of them being a silver-tongued devil named Raphael. Well.
His way. Everyone who's paid a visit looks quite changed by the experience.
There are a lot of conversations to be had in the brothel, but truthfully, it's more of like a fun, horny 13-year-old fantasy than anything all that interesting. I honestly don't mean that in a negative way either. There's just nothing really there to like dissect until we go upstairs. Once we're upstairs, there's a nymph named Nois, and a flaming fist named Jara. And being the 13-year-old pervert that I am, I broke into the room to watch. As I walked in, I'm spotted, and the flaming fist and I connect through the parasite.
She has been corrupted as a worshiper of the Absolute. The Absolute has shown me to her. Her eyes and veins begin to glow. Her skin is crawling and pulsing, and she hits the floor, writhing, and morphs into a mind flayer. I quickly dispatch the mind flayer and talk to Noise. It basically says, seeing a mind flayer kinda got her mad horny. In her fired up state, she settles for me and proceeds to perform like an inspirational ASMR on me. Truly not what I expected out of this situation. The 13-year-old me was disappointed. The adult in me appreciated the pep talk. Upstairs in the brothel, we also found Raphael, who I guess has been hoeing about. He has a proposition to be made, but before getting into the meat and potatoes of the offering, he snaps his fingers, and our character looks around bewildered and clear-headed. The tadpole still remains, but he has shut off communication with the Emperor, who this entire time has been listening to every conversation and thought. This seems like such a pivotal moment and should be groundbreaking, but just suffers due to the medium of this being a video game. It plays out like for the past 70 hours of gameplay, there's been ringing or static in my ears that Raphael finally has cured us of. And it should be this moment of immense relief, but when he shuts out the Emperor, nothing changes at all for the player. To be fair, I don't think there's any real way to implement this aspect of like the mind numbing that the player was feeling without it being some type of annoyance, like a white noise in the background, or your player every once in a while has like a randomized crippling headache, which happens like a few times. But all of that would just make the game less enjoyable and not really be additive to the experience. Raphael is here to strike a deal. He warns us that siding with the Emperor may not be the smartest idea, and the thought of us trying to take down Elderbrain will only lead to our demise. He hints at the idea that the Emperor is just using us as a pawn. It's not him we have to thank for our continued free will, but Orpheus, the gift Yankee that's trapped in the astral prism. If we free Orpheus, we could ally with him to face the brain, and conveniently, Raphael already has the Orphic Hammer, which we would be able to use to shatter his binds. Conveniently. The player can actually comment on how strangely convenient it is that he already has this rare artifact, which I do appreciate. You can at least make a point of it. In this situation, Raphael must have already retrieved said artifact to use it as a bartering chip in negotiations with us. Finally, Raphael reveals his real intentions. He'll help us free Orpheus, take down the Elder Brain, and save ourselves in the city if we give him the crown off of the Elder Brain that the three were using and are using to control it. He makes a compelling point by saying he would remove it from this world and take it to the Nine Hells, where he could use it to rule down below, coming Archdevil Supreme. Raphael proceeds to shed light on how the crown was created and how Gortash and company got their greasy little fingies on it. Raphael reveals a contract saying that we give him the crown upon the Elder Brain's defeat, and he promises to never use the crown to dominate a mortal. After all is said and done, I don't accept the contract, but he says if I come to my senses, he'll be waiting here till the end of the world. This was an extremely tough decision to make, which I think speaks volumes about Raphael's character design. He really made me question my relationship with the Emperor even more, and seeing him as a manipulator rather than a savior. But Raphael is a devil, and his pact is non-negotiable, and always feels like there's some type of clause and trick rolled up inside it. At the same time, I also think if Raphael is so powerful and cunning, why doesn't he just trick or kill Orin and Gortash himself? Maybe that's short-sighted of me, but that's what I wrote in my notes. After our conversation with Raphael, the Emperor enters back into our mind is honestly super annoying. He's upset that something blocked our communications and wants to know everything that was said between Raphael and I chose to keep most of it to myself, and the narrator says you can feel him pulling at the edges of your mind, trying to find the info, but you can tell him to knock it off. This conversation literally plays out like a high school girl trying to steal your phone and read your text messages. With that being said, it really begins to show how needy and insecure the Emperor is and how desperately he's trying to control the player and the narrative. Later on, we found a man who recognized Shadowheart and is disgusted with her since she has been excommunicated by Shar. Shadowheart says, I know the truth. I know my parents are still alive, and he says he will report her and that we should go to the House of Grief in the lower city and find the Sharans.
Finally, I reached the drawbridge into the lower city, and after burning multiple inspirations, I rolled a 31 to pass a DC check of 30 to convince the guards to let me through. Inside Gortash's tower is Mizora, waiting there, and makes fun of Wyll for his dad being captured and says, "We'll catch up later." Cool. I walked into the hall to confront Gortash, sat there, and turned around, fearful of what would happen when confronting him. I had finally gotten to Baldur's Gate and was afraid that confronting Gortash would throw me into the frying pan, and I wanted a chance to actually enjoy the city I've heard so much about, so I turned right back around. Inside the city, I entered the Elf Song Tavern and I saw Lacrissa, one of the tieflings from the Grove that we rescued from Moonrise Tower, and it legitimately made me so happy. So many of the NPCs are so well developed in this game that it was like seeing an old friend in the big city. Upstairs, we found a Flaming Fist who is investigating a chain of murders around the city, and we are put to task to help. In one of the side rooms, a crowd was gathered, and I got myself into a comedy battle.
I wouldn't be here tonight, except my wife ran off with a cambion. That's right, I got fiend zoned.
That night while resting, I entered the Emperor's domain inside the Astral Prism. He explains that with us taking Ketheric's Netherstone, the brain will grow more powerful as the grasp of control has lightened on it. He then explains some of his past life history and his past romance. I don't know, I just could not care less about the Emperor's life history. Then the scene makes me hold his freaking hand, which annoyed me. Oh god, I didn't...
Oh no!
The only option was continue. This weird manipulative relationship with the Emperor at times just feels really forced upon the player. This may not be a popular opinion, but once inside the city, the game really started to drag for me. There's so many quests and loose ends to be tied happening in the city, it's kind of overwhelming. A lot of the quests you can start in the city have loose relations with the main quest line, but there's just so much that at some point the plot begins to get lost. Maybe I just have a small brain, but with so many storylines happening at once, I found it hard to have any actual investment in any of them. Instead of enjoying the quest, I was just grinding away at them to get them over with so I could focus on the main quest. At the entrance to a wizard's tower, Eredin is there arguing with a sentient set of armor. Eredin was who we rescued long ago at the beginning of the game at the gate in front of the Druids Grove from the onslaught of goblins. And he was a douchebag then, still is now. Inside, Roland is working the front desk, selling spells, basically interning under a powerful wizard that is clearly abusing him. He's on his own journey, Godspeed, can't save everybody. Upstairs, the head wizard in charge, Lorikon, is basically tormenting another intern. Long story short, Lorikon is a powerful wizard who's also trying to enslave the Night Song and gain immortality. He's a total dick, so I'm not going to help him. In the park, we got into a scrap with worshippers of Baal and the Absolutist, and during it, a little dog named Sparky hopped into the fight and died, and I wanted to cry. Afterwards, a nearby Absolutist named Manip spoke to us, and the Elder Brain was trying to communicate through her.
Absolute power. Not much time left.
Pleading to kill Gortash and Orin, and that the Brain and I could work together. Once again, speaking with animals rules. We had a super funny conversation with a rat that actually helped in our murder investigation. After doing a bit of preliminary exploring and being overwhelmed with the amount of crap I had to do, I decided it was finally time to go pay Gortash a visit. This was by far the most disappointing moment in the game for me so far. I thought meticulously about how I wanted to approach this. I cast Disguise Self on my entire party, changed everyone's appearance, entered the main hall where Gortash is receiving an audience. I just tried to melt my way into the crowd all incognitus-like, and it doesn't work at all. It jumps into dialogue, and now Karlach is not even disguised in the cutscene, and she is flaming about Gortash. The Emperor pipes up saying, "Don't get caught up in her emotions." This drives me nuts. Sometimes NPCs and companions in this game have too much to say. Let me formulate my own opinion about what's happening. I don't need Squidbilly to tell me she's pissed off. Obviously she's mad. She's saying she's mad. Even though we are supposed to be in disguise, Gortash recognizes us. He has this conversation with us about how we killed Ketheric and the earthquakes are the Elder Brain trying to free itself from underground. He thinks we should come to an understanding and work together and turn on Orin, and we can rule Faerun together as gods, using the power of the Absolute. Saying this all the while standing in the middle of a chamber with an audience of people everywhere.
Gortash always did have an eye for opportunity.
Also, once again, the Emperor interrupts the flow of the conversation for no reason. Then, to sow a seed of trust between him and I, and distrust amongst my camp, Gortash warns me that someone in my camp is an imposter and not what they seem. He then again proceeds to lay out his plan in further detail. Meanwhile, all still while in audience, Ketheric's army was to march on Baldur's Gate to drive the people in the city to fear. Then Orin and her assassins would cause death and strife in the city and cause even more panic. Then Gortash would swoop in with his steel watchers and save the city, and he would slowly infect every citizen so he can control everybody in the city with the power of the Absolute. Then, after this enormous revealing conversation ends, it dawns on me. We are literally in the middle of his coronation from the infected Duke Ravengard, and he knights Gortash as the Archduke of Baldur's Gate. Am I missing something here? Is everyone in this room brainwashed so it doesn't matter that he just revealed his entire plan? How was he able to recognize me even though my entire party is disguised? Why does each villain just literally vomit out their master plan to the guy who is actively killing them? I feel like the developers were attempting to give the player so many options on where to take the story that at a certain point the story just loses gravity. I really do appreciate how this game can go almost any direction on like any game ever before it, but at a certain point having so many options available is A, overwhelming, and B, less impactful. After the coronation, we walk back to the city and Mizora is waiting for us. She tells us Wyll's dad is meant to be executed, but we could possibly save him. She will tell us more at camp. Later at camp, she shows up with her sweet baby girls and has a proposition for Wyll. Either he re-signs his contract with Mizora and she'll tell him where his father is, or option 2, she breaks the pact and Wyll is released, but his father will most likely die by the enemy's hand. This decision was left up to me to make, which didn't quite feel right. There wasn't even an option to let Wyll make the choice for himself, like earlier with Shadowheart and Nightsong. So I told Wyll to let his old man bite the dust. Mizora then decides to stick around camp for her own entertainment. Sweet. I then had a quest to go aid the Stone Lord over at the bank. I head downstairs to the vault, and a beefcake named Minsk emerges from a chest that was a mimic. Karlach wants to bone him.
Oh my gods. I'm gonna faint.
And then Jaheira emerges from nowhere with 2 helpers and is apparently aligned with him. Is this what Gortash was referring to? Then they vanish into thin air, and a fight broke out with Ball assassins. When all this happened, I literally thought to myself, dude, I just don't have time for this. Isn't the world about to end? While wandering the water's edge, I found our old friend Volo tied up to a load of gunpowder barrels. He's about to be exploded by a group of Baal worshippers for fear-mongering. Presumably, he's been singing negative songs about Baal and Orin. We rescued Volo mainly because I wanted all the gunpowder barrels that he was attached to. That's really about it. Back at camp, a young girl named Yenna is there, and we first met her at the outskirts of Baldur's Gate. She was standing around with her cat looking for her missing mother, and she's now joined us at camp and came to make us dinner. What a treat.
I put a special meat inside. Such a sweet little kitten. Oh, how it screamed!
Oh, it's Orin. That makes more sense. Orin took Yenna hostage and said the Murder Lord wants me as a sacrifice. Orin tries to proposition me to kill Gortash for her, claiming that when they entered a pact, her blades were bound against him and she can't actually do anything to kill Gortash. So she wants me to kill him, take his netherstone, bring it to her in the Temple of Baal, and there her and I will have a WWE deathmatch winner take all and get solo control over all 3 netherstones and the brain. This proposition coming from Orin feels extremely fitting. She only respects one thing: violence. So, if we're able to kill Gortash and bring her the stone, she respects that immensely and would be willing to throw down for solo control, because if she kills me,
she wins, and if she dies to me, she went down in a glorious, violent battle. With Gortash, his whole entire plan is to dominate and rule everyone, and the fact that he would be perfectly fine sharing his rule with us doesn't feel fitting at all to his character. I tell Orin I'll kill Gortash, but I just do this so I can leave my options open. She also tells me I need to consider taking down the Steel Watch before I can even make a move on him. At camp, Jaheira is there, which I was surprised about after seeing her in the bank, and I explain the whole entire ordeal that happened. She claims it must have been a shapeshifter, and she explains her history with the guy Minsk. Still not very interested at all. I said at some point in this Hellshalung video that I normally don't like followers in games, but this one they are great. But if they aren't an active part of my squad, I just didn't have really any interest at all of what they were getting into or their quest. I know some people would hot swap out who was a part of their party throughout the game. In hindsight, I wish I would have done that more and was able to experience the other stories, and maybe I would have enjoyed some other followers a bit more, because at this point I just feel very meh about anyone who hadn't been in my party the entire game. There is so much plot interweaving, which is cool, but it feels a bit chaotic. Orin and the Deep Gnomes think I should take down the Steel Watch, so I guess that's where we're headed. I snuck into the Steel Watch foundry and inside found Gondians being held prisoner with a purple slave collar cinched around their neck. The collars are connected to a motivator that when activated has the ability to kill the Gondians' loved ones who are linked via collar. So, Gortash's revolutionary invention, the Steel Watch, is actually a product of torture and slavery. This added a nice touch of complexity to the Steel Watch and increased my investment into actually wanting to take them down and do it methodically so I could save as many of the Gondians as possible. I talked to the head Gondian named Xander, who told me if I can save their families and deactivate the collars, that they would revolt against the Steel Watch and the slavers. After several hours of trying to fight my way through the foundry and dying over and over again, I realized that their families weren't just somewhere deeper in the foundry, but in an entirely different location. So, I left the foundry in search of the Gondian prisoners. Man, this is where the game felt like I had hit a brick wall. I've played the entire game on balance mode, so nothing crazy difficult, but combat just takes forever now. Any fight with multiple high-level enemies, which are all high level now, takes an eternity. And I'll admit, I'm not a min-maxer in video games. I didn't meticulously research the optimal build for each character. When I level up or find new gear, I thoroughly read the description and make a judgment call on what will be the best for my characters at that moment. The reason I've barely shown any combat in this video so far is Baldur's Gate encapsulated me on its incredible story and narrative freedom. I do find the combat really fun, and this is like one of the first turn-based combat games I've really ever played outside of Civilization or Pokemon. So, now that all my excuses are out of the way, I will say combat from this point on in the game becomes so uninteresting, because the combat itself just takes forever and is so drawn out, and obviously when you die, you just gotta run it back and try again. And I understand that this is how video game difficulty works. You die, you learn from your mistakes, and you try again. And that pure joy that is finally felt when you defeat a difficult enemy or a section of a game is so rewarding. Honestly though, from this point on, the combat didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I finally did it, I can't believe it, I'm so stoked. It was, well, thank God that's finally freaking over. I could tell my level of disinterest was very high because now I'm probably 80 hours into the game, and this is the first time I was literally just watching YouTube videos on my other monitor while playing. Previously, while playing, I was so engaged and wrapped up in the story and everything that not giving it 100% focus felt like literal sacrilege. During my time looking for the Gondian prisoners, I explored the sewers, found a room full of chests and zombies. I had sex with Mizora. I attended a funeral for a mermaid. The mermaid, she got ran over by a boat, which gave me a clue where to find the prisoners.
You didn't hear? Decapitated, whole big thing. We had a funeral for a bird.
Finally, after a while, I found an underground port with a submarine-like device that would take me to the Iron Throne, Gortash's underwater secret prison. Down there, we convinced the captain of the submarine to take us to the Iron Throne,
by just being honest. We had the option to lie and deceive him, but even he knows there's some true evil going on with Gortash down below, and he's willing to assist us. While on the submarine ride, Gortash somehow knows that we're on it and basically FaceTimes us. I don't understand this at all. How does he know I'm even down here? How is he FaceTiming me? We've been fighting with swords, for God's sake, while this type of technology is available. Also, if Gortash knows where I am all the time and Orin seemingly sneaks up on me 24/7, why haven't they just killed me themselves? It would clearly be unbelievably easy. Since I'm trying to rescue the prisoners from the Iron Throne, Gortash tells me he's going to hit the self-destruct button, and now all the prisoners are going to die, and it's my fault. The sequence for saving the prisoners was super enjoyable. Once the gang enters the Iron Throne, a turn counter clicks on screen. I have 6 turns to rescue as many prisoners as possible and get back to the submarine and try to escape. I really enjoyed this for multiple reasons. Firstly, I just have turn-based fight combat fatigue at this point, so any encounter that can last a max of 6 turns feels very refreshing. With 6 turns on the line, every single movement counts, and there are severe consequences for making the wrong choice. People die. Whereas most of the time, a wrong move just means you weren't as efficient as possible and will probably need to heal a little bit or something. From a tactical perspective, this was really, really interesting. I had to divide my team into 4 different directions to be as efficient as possible, and in one of the cells is the brainwashed and injured Duke Ravengard. Once he is freed, Mizora shows up and summons a bunch of exploding spiders in the middle of all the chaos. I guess the intent being that Wyll had broken the contract with Mizora and agreed to let his father die, so she was here to make sure that was the case. Also, in one of the prison cells was Omulum, who was the free mind flayer we met in the Underdark. Freeing him was interesting as well because it allows the player to control him and move around as a flayer and get a little bit of a taste of that. Duke Ravengard died, and so did Wyll, technically, but we managed to save a decent amount of the Gondian slaves. And a cool little detail they added here was with Wyll being dead when the Iron Throne exploded, his body didn't just magically transport with us, but it actually washed up on the beach somewhere, and we had to go find him and revive him. When I revived Wyll, the game seemed kind of bugged, where he basically didn't recognize that his father had died, and I had to tell him that his father died, even though he was there when it all happened. Now that the Gondian prisoners have been rescued, it's time to return to the Steel Watch Foundry. I managed after a couple hours to make my way through the foundry using a mix of sneaking around with my rogue, dispatching people here and there, and then bearing down for all-out brawls with the full squad. I mentioned at the very beginning of this video I sort of regretted picking a rogue as my class, and this is kind of where that started to come to light a lot more. To preface, this is totally a me problem. I probably shouldn't have played a rogue. The rogue is so fun in almost every aspect of the game besides combat, which really towards the end of Act 2 has become extremely difficult, which is a good thing. The game should get progressively harder as it goes on. It keeps it interesting. My rogue basically became a bystander stealth archer. I didn't feel like the leader of my party anymore. I would sneak in or go invisible, perform a sneak attack for the bonus, damage, and kind of initiate the fight. Then Karlach would leap in, swing her swords, chuck people, lacerate multiple enemies. Shadowheart would be casting radiant fire and insane divine spells as she got stronger, lighting multiple enemies aflame. Wyll is overdoing warlock stuff, phase shifting across the room, and then using his eldritch blast to knock someone off a cliff. And then it would come back to my turn as my rogue, and I would emerge from the shadows, shoot my arrow, and then go back into hiding. Early on in the game, I barely used range with my rogue because it was way more fun to fight dual wield and get up in people's faces. But now the only way for me really to progress the game was to be as efficient as possible in combat and not necessarily play how I thought was the most fun. I'm aware this is mechanically how a rogue is supposed to work. This is more of a me problem and an observation. The Steel Watchers in the Foundry were extremely difficult to defeat. They have a ton of health, They do an insane amount of damage and can spot invisible enemies. An interesting detail during these fights in the Foundry is the Black Gauntlet slavers would activate their motivators to kill the revolting Gondians, and you would need to deactivate them in one turn to prevent the Gondians from dying. The leader of the Iron Hand Gnomes, Wulbren, gave me a rune powder bomb to explode the Foundry, but I decided I wanted to save something that powerful for a different occasion. Xander Tubin, the leader of the Gondians, probably knows how to destroy the Foundry. Well, turns out he died during the Freedom Revolt, but I casted Speak with the Dead on him using Shadowheart and was able to find the code to destruct the Foundry. I finally put my rogue to some good use, and I avoided fighting the entire final room entirely, and went invisible and entered the code into the terminal. The Steel Foundry explodes as we make our way outside. Wulbren is there, congratulates us. He says the Steel Watchers collapsed and they now litter the street once the neurocenter that controlled all of them fell. Now that we've crippled Gortash's power quite a bit, it's time to deal with Orin for a second here. The entire time we've been inside the city of Baldur's Gate, a string of murders has been occurring. We found a list of suspects, basically have been trying to track them down before the assassin hits each target. We've come close a few times, but now we've finally caught him trying to slit the throat of a barber. I'm able to interrupt the assassin's monologue using a rogue dialogue option, basically making fun of him for monologuing to a paralyzed victim. Any enemy that uses blinds, throws, smoke, or fog can literally go straight to hell. It is such a huge inconvenience while fighting. We kill the red assassin, and that's finally put to rest. Back at camp, Mizora's still hanging around. Even though Wyll's pact is technically complete, she is still giving Wyll his powers because she wants revenge on the Absolutists for taking her captive at Moonrise Tower, and she thinks we are her best chance for seeing them be taken down. Now, this gives me a bit of mixed feelings. Wyll isn't my favorite companion in the game, but he has really grown on me. His character had big evolutions as a bit self-righteously hunting down Karlach to coming around and becoming allies with her and defying his patron Mizora. And by doing so, he himself became a devil, the exact type of creature he hated and spent his time hunting down. So, now his quest became getting him out of his pact with Mizora, which would most likely cure him, but he would lose his warlock powers. We, meaning I, made the tough decision to let his father die and be done with the contract. Down the Iron Throne, we found the Duke and had a chance to save his father while also breaking the contract, but Mizora put a quick end to that. But, in the end of all of it, Wyll still keeps his powers even though his contract is finished. So literally all of it kind of felt for nothing. The whole point of dooming Duke Ravengard was so Wyll could be done with his contract and go back to normal. Now, I get the reason from a development point why they did this was for someone like me who spent the entire game with Wyll and their party, got him pimped out, leveled up, and then only to have him be completely unusable at the end of the game would be pretty frustrating and disappointing. But this just basically made me feel like everything I had done with Wyll was for nothing. I'd give Wyll's questline a 6 out of 10. Wyll is a good guy, but mainly because Mizora did a lot of the heavy lifting and was an extremely interesting character. Now, on to Shadowheart's quest. We found the Shar and Hidden Temple at the House of Grief. I will admit, I actually came here right away when I got to Baldur's Gate and got my ass absolutely whooped. So, I decided to come back after leveling up and getting more gear. The Cloister of Somber Embrace is a creepy and depressing place. It gave me a lot of empathy towards Shadowheart at the thought of her having to grow up here as a child.
I remember this place now. A whole stolen childhood spent in these halls. The Mother Superior must be close.
Viconia, who is the Sharan Mother Superior, basically their leader, tasked Shadowheart with finding the Githyanki artifact, which she did. And I'm not sure what I'm missing here though, because the Emperor claimed to have found the artifact, and that's what granted him his free will from the Elder Brain. But Shadowheart also found the artifact and had it after the Nautiloid abduction and crash. So I'm assuming the Emperor found it first, climbed up inside the astral prism like a hermit crab, and then Shadowheart found it? Viconia says she's going to kill Shadowheart, make an example of her for denouncing Shar, and if we give up Shadowheart and the artifact to her, she'll let us live. This is another insanely difficult fight that took like a couple of hours to actually get through, of dying and reloading. Every enemy in here is extremely tough, and there is a lot of them. Mama Viconia does a ton of damage and is capable of one-shotting almost anyone in the squad if she hits hard enough. This fight was pretty annoying. They just spam blinding effects on your whole team, so eventually I resorted to domestic terrorism. Remember that nice room powder bomb Wolburn gave me to explode an entire building? What if instead I set it off in a temple? I feel like a total chode doing this, but as a man with 2 very young children, my gaming time is limited, and I didn't enjoy grinding out encounters for the only 2 to 3 hours a night I would have to play a game. In my younger days, when I had 0 responsibilities and I could sit at my computer 14 hours a day, hell yeah, I live for the grind, brother. Now, not so much anymore. After a well-thought-out bombing on the Church of Shar, we proceed into the bowels of the temple where we found Arnell and Emmeline Hollowleaf in magical bindings, Shadowheart's parents. And I don't know why it made me laugh very hard that her real name is Jen.
Jen.
When attempting to free them, Shar herself begins to speak. Shadowheart is left with the choice. Either kill her parents and free herself from Shar's curse over her, or to free her parents and be forever damned and cursed by Lady Shar.
Please. If you slay every one of your brothers and sisters, that was never where my power resided.
This was an extremely emotional and difficult decision to make. Over the course of the game, Shadowheart so badly wanted to prove herself to her Mother Superior and to Lady Shar. Over time, the player begins to see how dark and twisted the worship of Shar is, and I personally began to question Shadowheart's morals. It seems maybe at this time Shadowheart was also beginning to do the same. Slowly, memories of her past life come back to her, and she realized that the worship of Shar hadn't saved her life, but erased it. At her breaking point in the Shadowfell, where she renounced Shar and saved Dame Aelin, finding her parents and restoring her life became her sole purpose. Now, here we are, having defeated the cloister of Shar worshippers, spoke face to face with Shar herself, found her parents in bindings, and the only way to finally free herself from Shar's grasp completely is to kill her parents, breaking the source that binds her to Shar, the very thing she came to recover. Her mother has slowly begun to lose it. She is a human and her mind has degraded and faded. Her father, however, being an elf, is still pretty sharp. He tells Shadowheart to break free from Shar's grasp. They have very little life left to live, while Shadowheart can break free from her and return to the world and really do some good. She then turns them into balls of light. I don't know. That's not what I thought was going to happen. I thought Shadowheart was going to have to, like, take a freaking knife to their hearts or something. Instead, they became little Navi fairies. I'll admit, it was a relief, but a bit anticlimactic. Afterwards at camp, Shadowheart reflects a little more in depth about her feelings of all that transpired, and you travel to a statue of Saloon and talk about what her future holds. Also, while writing this, I realized that Shadowheart is maybe bugged for me, and that saving Nightsong, I guess, is supposed to turn her hair white. I don't quite know if I'm missing something here. She denied Shar, saved Nightsong, turned her parents into light bulbs, and she still looks the same. And everywhere else I look, people got white-haired Shadowheart. Anyways, I'd give Shadowheart's story arc a 8 out of 10. It was good. Now, Karlach's quest will be waiting till the end. Now, having taken down the Steel Watch, the Flaming Fist Guards are openly hostile and attack on sight. I made my way to the Emperor's old hideout because he said there's some good stuff down there, and I could use any help I can get at this point. In the hideout is a group of Githyanki monks in search of the Astral Prism. Inside his hideout is basically just a bunch of crap that when you click on it, he tells you a little bit more of his life history.
A recipe for fiddlehead soup. A favorite meal of mine. When I had need of meals like that.
There's a powerful set of heavy armor down there, but no one in my group wears heavy armor. His hideout was pretty disappointing. It would have been nice if the armor was scaled for the proficiency of whatever class you were currently playing instead of just being a set heavy armor. All while I'm trying to liberate the city from Orin and Gortash, this dork named Etyard over at the Baldur's Gate Gazette is trying to run a smear campaign on me because he's being paid to print propaganda for Gortash. So I snuck into the basement of the Gazette to change the story and access the printing press, and turns out the printing press is a sentient being, a fey folk. And he knows Dolly, which was the pixie that was trapped in the moon lantern that I freed in the Shadowlands. And because I helped Dolly, the Fey printer agrees to help me change the headlines. And I thought this was going to get like so cool and I was going to be able to create a story through all the different dialogue options. But instead I just dug through the trash in the basement and found a pre-written article that says some positive things about me. This was a pretty big disappointment. I thought there was going to be like a really creative aspect here. At camp, I went for a long rest, and the freaking Emperor is just lounging back shirtless. Basically explains that when he went into his old hideout, he revealed all of his secrets now, and he feels completely aligned with us and open. He tries to phrase his behavior in a positive way, but basically talks about how he essentially manipulated us to make sure our goals would align with his. He also said he really enjoyed being inside our brain and feels like we're about to have a deeper connection. God, I shut that down real quick. He then instantly switches back to business talk while standing completely shirtless in front of me. The Emperor tries to convince me again to become an Illithid to deal with the Elder Brain, and I am very disappointed in myself for not killing the Emperor. It's easy in hindsight to see how creepy and manipulative his behavior is now, watching back and analyzing the gameplay, but I don't know. I don't know if I realized it while I was playing, to be honest, which I have to give credit for his character design and writing because I sided with him so far and kept going along with his plan. Truly, my character was stuck in an emotionally abusive relationship and I didn't even realize it. Making this video and watching it back, actually, I feel a bit embarrassed that I sided with the Emperor because he made me feel like the only correct decision was to agree with him. And now, even though I have immense disdain for him, I have to admit, he's a good character. Before taking down Orin or Gortash, I decided I need to reach level 12, so a side quest is in order. We're off to the Cazador's palace to rescue some stolen children. I'll try to breeze through this pretty quickly because, well, I assume this is the ending point for Astarion's questline, but I never even met Astarion in this playthrough. So, this was a bit interesting to go through this place without any context besides what I could read in-game letters and books. The Cazador's palace is guarded by thralls who are very easily deceived. Inside, servants bustle about and they're all clearly horrified and frantic. The castle is pretty interesting. There's illusory walls that lead into rooms. The journals of the residents are pretty neat. There's a giant sealed door that we need to figure out how to open that is unrecognizable in language. And behind the doors we can hear a menacing voice talking about fresh meat. There was a cursed necrotic child that I chucked down a hallway at a servant. Inside her room we found a dictionary to decipher the door. Neat. I assume maybe with Astarion that all of this is totally skippable. It would definitely be interesting to see how this plays out with him in our party. We finally crack that door open, and there's a bunch of werewolves in here. Right when we enter, the werewolf tells us, hey, we can't be in here, and no witnesses are allowed, and they immediately attack. After defeating all the beasts, I begin to look around and notice that there's a large amount of dead human bodies strewn across the floor. These guests were invited to the palace to attend a party, but it was all a trap for them to be fed on by werewolves and vampires. Upstairs from the main chamber is a complex attic that the player can find and read a series of notes that tells the heartbreaking story of Amanita Cesar, a young 13-year-old girl who was invited to the palace by her uncle Cazador for a party and was unwillingly transformed into a vampire. She refused to partake in the family rite and was banished to live in the attic. She tried to fight vampirism and refused feeding, and in the attic, they sent up a bottle of blood that she eventually succumbed and drank. And for years, they tried to starve her out, and then finally they sent up a live captive, and she fed. This is where she left her name behind and donned the persona Lady Incognita, and wrote several books about vampirism. This is a nice touch of an interesting story for those who are willing to read and explore. And I love little inclusions in games like this that reward players who are willing to take a little time to explore a side area or even read in-game books and notes. We took an elevator down to Cazador's lair, and inside ornate jail cells were filled with thralls. One, a man named Sebastian, tells a story of how a charming and handsome man named Astarion tricked him, and he woke up here in this cell. He mentions that Cazador has a staff that controls the cells, and getting it from him is the only way to free them. In another cell is a bunch of little freak children.
Smells fresh. Smells alive.
Who are the kids I was sent here to rescue. They were also tricked by Astarion. Seems like he's been busy. Down below is a giant platform with enemies circled around a man standing in the middle. Cazador Cazar. I regret my decision here because I'm sure he probably had some interesting dialogue, but I just shot him and launched straight into the fight. There's bats everywhere that are super annoying, and a bunch of fallen Gwar hunters who are the slain versions of the people who sent us here to rescue their children. I'm sure Cazador was supposed to be super tough, but I actually just Eldritch blasted him off the platform with Wyll before he ever made a single attack. After beating off his pesky little bats and thralls, I examined the floating zombies surrounding the ritual site, and what do you know? Zombie Astarion. I'm sure this would have all been a far more interesting quest and area if I had Astarion to provide context to any of this. In a weird way, though, I enjoyed this because it felt like I was piecing together a puzzle I wasn't really supposed to do. I never even met Astarion in this playthrough, so it was like pulling back the curtain and piecing together the life of someone I know of but don't truly know. I opened the coffin and Cazador was lying in the coffin, which was confusing since I just pushed him off a cliff. I read his thoughts and he feels bad that he's become a monster. That's nice. The floating vampires came out of their trance, and maybe I shouldn't have pulverized Astarion. They were also like bugged and their heads were normal and they were topless and covered in blood, so that's great. She says they're going to retreat to the Underdark for a second chance at life. I used the staff to release the prisoners and they just kind of phased through this gate. As we're leaving, the Gwar hunters show up now, which is annoying for them to show up now. How the hell did they even figure out how to get down here, and why didn't they just help in the first place? She complains that I released thousands of vampires on the Sword Coast, but I literally just watched like 6 people walk out of a cell. Back on the surface, citizens begin coming up to me saying that they read about me in the Baldur's Gate Gazette, and they're happy to see something other than Gortash being fawned about. Speaking of Gortash, let's go kill him. Fighting my way through the tower, I had to kill a number of iron consoles and Black Fist. They were decently strong enemies, but what interested me the most were these automated turrets that would shoot out concussion grenades. After narrowly dodging them, I realized something. I could just frickin' pick them up. On them, they had the effect that would say about to explode, but they never did explode. So, upstairs, we get there, Karlach and Gortash talk. She says she felt betrayed and hurt for him trading her to Zariel. Gortash said it was for the greater good and helping her achieve her potential, but never actually revealed why he sold her to Zariel. The fight broke out and I quickly disabled the grenade turrets. Then I thought to myself, hey, what about that grenade sitting in my pocket that's supposed to explode? So I hucked it at him, and by complete happenstance, also knocked down the iron candelabra directly above him onto his head, doing a ton of damage. I then, with my second action, hucked another concussion grenade, and in a single round of combat before he could even make a move, Gortash was dead. Like I mentioned earlier, in the later game, combat feels a bit grindy. Moments like this make me absolutely love it though, when combat isn't just a straight up grueling fight, but has a puzzle to be solved inside of it, where a bit of cleverness or maybe even luck can turn out what feels impossible into a total breeze. We cleaned up the Black Hand, and just like that, Gortash is defeated. Even though Gortash's fight probably seemed a bit anticlimactic, I was happy it ended this way. Gortash wasn't a warrior. He was a little debutante weasel who used machinery, slavery, and politics to rise to power. We disabled the steel watch and cut his legs out from beneath him, so going up and using his own technology, his concussion grenades, to completely pulverize him before he could even react felt so just. After his defeat, Karlach has a bit of a meltdown. Bringing justice, Gortash wasn't as sweet and fulfilling as she would have hoped. She knows her infernal engine is still failing, and soon she will die.
Her reward for years of suffering, escaping Zariel's control, and killing Gortash is just an early grave due to her modified heart being unstable. When I collected Gortash's netherstone, the Elder Brain tries to infiltrate my mind, and the Emperor intervened and helped drive him back. Only one netherstone remains now, Orin's. And what do you know? Back at camp, Orin has left a note telling us to complete the murder tribunal and meet her in the depths of the Temple of Baal. Oh yeah, and she still has Yenna, which, not to be mean, but really not the greatest of collateral, to be honest. On my way to find Orin, the Elder Brain continues to try to communicate with me and pleads with me to kill Orin. I found a secret passage to the Underground Baal Temple where I either need to fight my way through or complete the murder tribunal to gain access to the deeper parts of the temple. Inside the gates stood 3 Death Knights.
Present me well from gifts thine own, or I shall rend thy flesh from bone.
Dude, these guys were sick. The armor, the voices, the fat rhymes.
A grasping hand, an offering vile. Enter now the Dread Lord's trial.
Past the Death Knights upon a throne set Sarevok on check, and he was surrounded by 3 echoes or ghosts of Baal spawns that were once a part of a group called the Five. Why there's only 3 of them, you might ask? Well, I don't know. Frankly, it doesn't matter. The 5 were basically traitors, Baal worshippers who killed other worshippers of Baal to steal their power, and as punishment, when Baal was resurrected, he appointed these 3 ghosts to serve under Sarevok on the tribunal as punishment. The narrator tells me that Sarevok's presence sparks dread in my stomach. I'm not a fan of that when a game, or really any medium, tells you how you should feel. Imagine if you were watching a movie and Morgan Freeman was narrating and says, "And now you feel truly sad watching this scene." Show me, don't tell me. This would have been one of those great moments to have those followers that love butting in convey the sense of fear instead of having the narrator tell me how I feel. Sarevok looks insanely intimidating. The ghostly women are creepy. The ambience of the room is dark and frightening. His voice is deep and booming. And for some reason, something just isn't clicking, and it felt off in Sarevok's performance.
Baal has never had a more gifted prodigy. Orin's gift surpassed even her mother's. Her mother knew this, and she could not bear it. "Lay not a finger on this child," he said, "nor let any other, for this child will serve me with unhope." Baal's reasons are not for us to question. My lord made his choice. I abided by his words.
To give the voice actor credit, I obviously couldn't do better. He just heard my terrible Morgan Freeman impression. But the voices have been such a high caliber, more than any other game I've ever played, that something here just felt off and I couldn't quite place my finger on it. So I decided I wanted to look up the voice actor to figure out if he's done any other performances, and it clicked. The voice actor for Sarevok's name is Red Pepper, and his main gig is doing voiceovers for movie trailers, and that's exactly what's going on.
Men in Black, saving the Earth from the scum of the universe. Blair Witch Project, Armageddon, Space Jam.
Sarevok's dialogue is well written. Mr. Pepper's voice is incredible and powerful, and it fits the character, but his cadence for how he's talking sounds like someone reading a script for a movie trailer.
Now, I will clutch one of their souls from the abyss, that they may show Baal who you are.
Not a Satanist sitting in a basement. Anyway, turns out Sarevok is Orin's grandpappy, and when Orin was a little girl, her mom, Sarevok's daughter, tried to kill Orin as a sacrifice, and Orin killed her mother. Baal spoke through Orin, claiming her as the chosen one, and everyone who serves Baal should protect her. After all that deeply disturbing family history, it's time to either fight Sarevok or begin the murder tribunal. So I decided it was time to fight. And holy crap, Sarevok is a level 16. The max level in this game for the player is 12. As you can guess, I was very swiftly, got my teeth kicked in, so I reloaded and I thought about this strategically. I took out the Death Knights before facing Sarevok. and man, is their gear frickin' sweet. Inside, I surveyed Sarevok's chamber, and I noticed a little perch in the right corner. So I plopped my whole team on top, and I started blasting. Even though he's a level 16, having the high ground gives such an immense combat advantage, it's insane. And every time he would climb up to fight me, I would shove him right back off. Killing Gortash taught me a ton. Some fights are about unlocking the puzzle, not winning them through brute force. And I don't think there's any way I could have beaten Sarevok without using the environment to my advantage. Once he's defeated, inside the side chamber is that holy font named Valeria from earlier. Honestly, as cute as the thing is, it's a total dickhead. I picked up an amulet of ball and proceeded to a locked door that is under password lock. A voice spoke to me saying, I must show proof of the Dreadlord's favor. I tried to lie and say that I did the murder tribunal, and that's why I have the amulet, and the door knew I was lying. And then I told it that I, murdered everybody, and the door said, well, it's a bit unorthodox, but hey, that works down here. I love little stuff like that in the game. Inside the door, we were set up for an ambush by Ball assassins, and another test ensued. There was Farslayer Gislev, Death's Gatekeeper, who we had to kill under a certain amount of turns, or his kill ritual spell would activate and automatically kill all of us. And he also had 4 stacks of Unstoppable. Now, Unstoppable is such an unbelievably stupid effect, and I don't know why it's even a part of the game. It's a completely artificial way to raise the difficulty of an enemy without actually mechanically adding anything interesting to the enemy. Unstoppable just makes it so any attack or spell does 1 damage and consumes a stack of Unstoppable. I have to land 4 meaningless attacks on the Gatekeeper before I can actually do any damage. Why not just give the guy 300 health? I'd prefer him being a damage sponge over being invulnerable, and any enemy with a large health bar would be visually more intimidating than essentially a mosquito that's invincible for 4 turns that's going to try to inject me with AIDS. We descended deeper into the Temple of Ball, and as we stepped deeper and deeper into the depths, we would pass statues that would mutter phrases and information about Ball. We approached a sealed door and pressed the amulet of Ball against the door, and it gives way. Inside the Temple of Ball, worshippers walked about, and they're not hostile, thank God. Man, these people in here are such losers.
Gore on the wall, pulp on the hands.
I feel assassins in video games have such a difficult time balancing being dark and sinister with being a huge goth dork.
Destroy us, Bobby us, heal us. Flesh feel slithering down my gullet. Succulent. Ha, tender.
Under these cool robes and hats, you're all just a bunch of losers.
Silence!
Down at the base of several staircases is Orin. She stands over an altar with Yenna lying there. She's still breathing. Orin is happy that I killed Gortash.
See how good I was? How patient while you drained the tyrant's juices for me.
Mark me down as scared and horny.
But she is upset that I killed Sarevok. Not because he's her grandfather or anything, but apparently she wanted to kill him. And because I disobeyed and I didn't complete the murder tribunal, and I also failed the persuasion roll, she killed Yenna. I don't really have much to analyze here, but I thought this shot was very strange. It's like a super long holding pan where you can see yourself between Orin's legs, then films her like calves and feet walking off the altar. It's just a bit bizarre. Orin is supposed to be like disturbingly sexy, and they're definitely hitting the mark, and I don't like the way that she makes me feel. Orin calls out to Ball, and she transforms into a Deathclaw. It's actually supposed to be the avatar of Ball that is referred to as the Slayer. Truthfully, not what I would have expected to represent Ball, but it's pretty sweet looking. The fight was very difficult. In fact, I might classify this fight as downright stupid. Orin as a Slayer is extremely powerful. She does massive amounts of damage and can cover so much ground in a single turn. And then there's an inanimate object named the Boon of Ball that gives Orin stacks of Unstoppable every single turn, meaning she needs to be hit like 7 times every turn before she can actually take any damage. And this is more of a puzzle than a fight, though. It was all about spamming as many multi-hit attacks as possible to chop down her stacks of Unstoppable,
to do damage before they refresh each round. I kept Shadowheart on the wings to spam healing spells to keep us all alive, and finally after several attempts I was able to beat down Orin and the Ball Assassins by the skin of my teeth. Sanctuary and Unstoppable are just stupid effects. That's really the only problem with this fight. I just don't get why they're even a thing. Orin as the Slayer dissolves very violently into a pile of blood and bones, and we now have defeated the Chosen 3. I pulled the Netherstone from Orin's dagger, and once it was in my possession, the Emperor phase shifts in to see it for himself. The Netherstone begins to pulse and shows me the location of the Elder Brain and where it is imprisoned beneath the city. Yo, dude, how freaking big is this cave system underneath the city? Baldur's Gate is essentially like an iceberg. The Emperor warns us to take care of any pressing business before pursuing the Elder Brain, because once we do, there'll be no turning back. And I appreciate this verbal warning a bit more than just a literal pop-up on screen about being content locked. In the corner lies a white dragonborn circled in a pentagram. And at the time I didn't realize it, but this is the Dark Urge character. If you don't select him as a playthrough option, this is where he ends up. Orin has some great gear, and in her side room I found the demented writings and journals that give more insight to her character. She also has an effigy of her mother that she killed. Nice. The moment I returned to the surface, a fight commenced. With the weakening of control over the Elder Brain, many of the parasite infected begun their metamorphosis into mind flayers. This was the first time in a while that I felt the game put some pressure on the severity and the timeliness of the situation at hand. It's easy to get lost in the city and all the side quests and forget that technically an army is outside the gates and things should be really getting out of hand here. When some of the infected transformed, it was definitely a moment of like, oh shoot, I better get going. Down below there was a massive pack of cranium rats sitting around a pillar. I thought for sure they're going to attack me, so I laid down a fire wine barrel and set it on fire. And I just got a real good chuckle out of this. Down below, there is a series of journals detailing Gortash and the Emperor talking. Firstly, who the hell wrote this down and left it in a cave? Also, it finally reveals that the reason the Emperor was able to break free from the Elder Brain's psionic control and maintain his memories unlike any other mind flayer is because he had a really good personality. I'm gonna scream. That is so stupid. Oh, yeah, and also he says that he is entirely devout to the needs of the Elder Brain and its master. Great. I don't even know what to make of any of that. We hopped on a rowboat deeper into the never-ending cave system of Baldur's Gate, and the brain tried to harpoon us with a stalactite. As we get closer, the Elder Brain's power strengthens as it attempts to control us. We make our way through the cave, and headless corpses litter the floor, and intellect devourers scurry about. As we approach the pool, I ready the nether stones, and they combine into one big superstone. The nether brain erupts from the pool of liquid, rising in its bulbous glory, and the Emperor tells me to use the stones. I then rolled a nat 1 on a constitution check, which gave me a good laugh, but I had inspiration to burn. The nether brain tries to play off like it was in control the entire time. It was its intention for me to kill Ketheric, Gortash, and Orin. All of the DC checks in this are extremely high, and I fail nearly every single one of them. The brain explains that essentially every single event that has occurred so far in the story has been because of the strings it has pulled. From the 3 chosen ones learning about the crown, the Emperor breaking free, the knowledge of Orpheus, and us. Our actions of trying to be the hero and kill the chosen 3 is what had brought the nether brain its freedom back, and that it was all part of its master plan, and we were just a pawn. I try to fight and resist the Elder Brain, and right as I'm about to be destroyed and succumb to its powers, the Emperor teleports me away into the astral plane. He could have teleported me this entire time? This reminded me of like the Grey Eagles from the Lord of the Rings. There have been more than a few moments where a nice little teleport could have worked wonders, and now that we're near the end of our story, he busts that one out. What a guy. The Elder Brain emerges from the Undercity, and citizens scream and flee in horror. As it crests the top of the city, a fleet of Nautiloid ships warp into the sky, ready for an assault on Baldur's Gate. On the ground, the previously infected begin to seramorph, and now mind flayers surround the city from up above and below. So you might be wondering, what was the point of collecting the nether stones that were supposed to allow me to control the Elder Brain with the nether crown? The Emperor explains that the nether crown must have evolved the brain from an Elder Brain into a nether brain. That's like saying I put a dog collar on my French bulldog and he evolved into a collar dog. The Emperor basically says the stones weren't the problem, but it's me. I'm too stupid. The Emperor tries to convince me that we should give him all the nether stones and he will face the brain, since an Illithid is far more intelligent. It was this exact moment I really regretted siding with the Emperor and was left thinking of my sweet baby boy Raphael and how I should have aligned myself with him. Karlach steps up and volunteers to turn herself into an Illithid instead of risking giving the stones to Squid Boy. So, my three options are: give the Emperor the stones, which seems like a terrible idea, let Karlach transform into a Flayer, which would possibly save her life, but would damn her into a life of a Flayer, or I turn myself into a Mind Flayer. This was a difficult and truthfully a bit of a gutting decision for me. This entire game, I was the hero. I purposely played this moderately altruistic character. I avoided ever succumbing to the Illithid powers, even though it would have made me vastly stronger and the combat way easier, which is part of what I struggled the most with in this game. Now, at the end of all of it, to stay on the path, I need to give up my selfish heroism to maintain my values and to save my beloved companion, Karlach. This was really disappointing for me, but in the best way possible. This is good writing. I tried really hard this entire playthrough to be the capital H hero. I wanted to be the one who saved the world. I was going to do it without compromise. The game basically puts us to the ultimate test of heroes: selflessness. At the end of all of this, are you willing to give up the credit for saving the world that I was working towards to save your ally's life and let her take the glory instead? And I can't believe how selfish I felt. I was upset that the game wouldn't let me beat the game, staying the good guy, and capturing all the glory. It gave me an ultimatum. At the end of it all, the right decision was to give up the glory and let Karlach possibly have a new lease on life. Karlach takes a parasite from the Emperor that will complete the evolution. The seramorphosis was gnarly, hearing bones crack and skin writhing. After she's transformed, Karlach sucks Orpheus' brain right out of his skull, absorbing his power to block the Netherbrain's Illithid powers. And with her transformation, Karlach's engine has finally settled, and she's ready to make the most of it. Upon exiting the astral plane, a Githyanki dragon swoops overhead, and the city is already covered in fire and ash as dragons and Nautiloids duel in the sky. Then behind us stands the Netherbrain. It was incredible that in the background the entire time, Nautiloids and dragons flash around fighting. It really sells the catastrophe warfare atmosphere. I don't know why this made me laugh really hard, but a cutscene starts of the Flaming Fist rallying his troops, and the camera angle changes, and it's just Wither and Zevlor standing there that he's talking to. I don't know if my narrator bugged at this point, but dialogue is to be read for the narrator, and it would pop up, but nothing would be said, and it would just be this awkward moment of the Flaming Fist facial expressions changing while silence filled the room. This is a cool moment of all the people we've helped in the game come to rally around us and provide assistance in the fight. Then everyone looks for me for a speech to rally them, and my game, I think, bugged again, and the narrator's dialogue seemed to be referring to me as if I was a mind flayer. So my speech about freedom didn't even work because I was a mind flayer to them, I guess.
Certainty ripples through them. That a mind flayer could appeal to freedom is a confusing notion.
We took the fight to the castle courtyard where we faced an array of enemies, all servants of the Absolute. It was a tough fight, but really interesting mechanics of summoning the allies into battle and using each of them to their strengths. The explosions in this game while fighting are very satisfying. This fight did take forever, and not because it was necessarily difficult, because there are like 50 people a part of this, so each round of combat just takes a year. In my notes, I literally wrote that I was falling asleep at my desk because this fight took so long, and it would take so long for it to get back around to my turn in combat. After battling our way up to High Hall, we can see the stem of the Netherbrain wrapped and coiled around the stone column like a snake, climbing higher and higher. Climbing towards the Netherbrain stem, we had a bit of a timed trial where we had to get to the top of the stone structures as fast as possible, with enemies guarding the way and reinforcements for the Netherbrain were on our tail, and the Nautiloids were shooting airstrikes at us. When we approach the stem, the brain tries to manipulate Karlach to tell her to leave us and join her. There's also a nice convenient healing fountain before heading into the fight, so I appreciate that. And then we started climbing up its veiny shaft, and it freaking starts to fly away. As we crest the top of the brain, we see the Nether Crown. That is what we need to reach and get control of to take down the brain. The Nether Brain dresses down each of us in the group as thralls composed of brain matter form, mirroring each one of our party members, and a dominated dragon swoops in and lands on top of the brain. Fighting the brains version of each of my party members made me realize how poorly I utilize each of my character's skills and abilities. Good time for me to come to that realization in the very last fight. On the outer lining of the brain's walkway, extremely powerful mind flayers lined the wings. I got absolutely rocked over and over and over again trying to fight these enemies. I'm sure there are some people who thought this fight wasn't hard at all, but I didn't see any way of fighting through this. So, I summoned every ally that was still alive, I used every damn scroll that I found so far in this game, and I sprinted as fast as possible to the crown while basically ignoring the enemies. And it worked. We opened up a portal into the mind of the Netherbrain and hopped inside. So this is the brain inside the brain. I wouldn't think too much about it. During this fight, a timer begins with 5 turns, and the brain will break free, and a new mechanic of disappearing platforms each turn begins, causing me to be a little bit more strategic about movements and actions. The team did all they could to the brain, and by the end of it, only Karlach and the Emperor survived the fight. Karlach lands the final blow, and the brain begins to plead for its life. It would rather be used and controlled than die. Karlach is channeling the Nether Stones, and it gives me one last opportunity. I can betray Karlach, dominate the brain, and become the Absolute. But instead, I let Karlach take control of the moment. She commands the brain to die. The brain is weak enough now that the Netherstone crown has complete control. The brain begins to shake and erupt as a searing pain enters our skull as a tadpole that's been trapped inside this entire time burns away. The brain begins to tumble down as it's slowly dying, spinning recklessly over the city as it crashes into the water near the harbor. Then it explodes. Why? How does the brain explode? When the brain dies, all of the flares around the city begin to quiver and weaken. The townfolk rally and begin slaying the mind flayers, and the song from the very beginning of the game triumphantly plays as the people of Baldur's Gate have reclaimed their home.
Everything you did, everything you sacrificed, it was worth it. For this.
The golden sun shines behind us as the group revels and takes stock of all that had just happened. In the end, I'm glad to see Karlach be the savior. She's gone through a lot. Betrayal, slavery to a devil, fighting an infernal war, being given a death sentence and reborn into something that she despised. She deserved it. The game begins to close as the people of Baldur's Gate prepare to rebuild, grateful for the heroes who saved their city. Then, all of a sudden, it cuts to Shadowheart saying, "Last night was perfect." But
she's been thinking about the future and what lies ahead. This felt so weird and out of place. It was like when you watch a movie and it ends, and then a weird, totally unconnected scene that plays that is meant to basically just tee up a sequel if they decide to do one. I'm a grown man in my 20s, and I was legitimately holding back tears as this game was ending, which I've never done before while playing a video game. And then it cuts to Shadowheart and totally snapped me out of the moment. After the credits roll, Wither begins to speak of the Dead Three. Turns out, Withers is a god, the god Yuergir, the lord of the end of everything. And he got bored of being a god and divided up his duties to, you guessed it, Bane, Miracle, and Ball. Withers, you sly dog. Which also now makes sense why he was literally the only unkillable character in the entire game, I think. So, that's it. Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the greatest games I've ever played, but it's not without flaws. I preface with what I'm about to say that I truly examined this game under a microscope because it is leagues better than 99% of games out there. This game is an A+, but not 100%, more like a 96. As the acts progressed, the quality of the storyline began to crack a bit. Fighting towards the back half of the game lost most of its enjoyment as enemies became either sponges or had some type of artificial attribute to make them difficult rather than interesting mechanics. Once inside the city of Baldur's Gate, the quests became super intertwined and chaotic, and a lot of them started to feel pointless and lose a bit of their meaning. The story up until Act 3 felt so airtight, but there was a lot of small plot holes if you really thought about it for too long and thought about what was being said. The back half of the game felt a bit rushed in comparison to the front, and if you notice, I barely talk about gear at all in this video because the weapons and armor in this game are just super lackluster and disappointing. On the flip of all of this, there is so much that BG3 did right. The quality of animations and cutscenes, the followers were better constructed and more interesting than any other game I can think of. The game made me actually care about my companions and the people who lived in the world. The voice acting, maybe more importantly the dialogue, basically puts the entire gaming industry to shame. There is a level of freedom and creativity in this game that is unfounded elsewhere. I think there's going to be a bit of a disconnect for a few years in the gaming industry now that players have gotten a taste of this level of creative freedom and power and will feel disappointed with RPGs that don't deliver this level of freedom. 38 pages, 25,450 words later, I give the game a 2 out of 10 because I didn't get to have sex with Shadowheart.